called on the former Tory deputy chairman to apologise, and the Liberal Democrats have now tabled a motion of censure in the House of Commons.
No-go areas. Another Tory Islamophobia row after an MP refers to places in Birmingham and London with large Muslim communities as unsafe. He's been criticised by MPs in his own party, but some say he's made a fair comment.
And Prince William has dramatically pulled out of attending his godfather's memorial service due to what the palace are calling personal reasons. The last-minute announcement is raising eyebrows among some royal watchers.
This news about the Windsor memorial service just breaking in the last hour or so is really quite concerning because Prince William, it's the memorial service for his godfather.
Yeah.
It was only down the road from where he lives. He was meant to do a reading at this memorial service, and there's this last-minute pulling out for personal reasons.
And what does personal reasons mean? Is he unwell? Does it have to do with the Princess of Wales, who we know is in recovery? What could it be?
It has to be something fairly significant.
With the King? Is he needed with the King? Because the Queen was supposed to be leading this on behalf of the royal family, Queen Camilla, that is. And now Prince William's not going to be there. What could this be? It's curious.
It's very curious, and it has to be something incredibly significant because he was meant to be a big part of this memorial service for someone who was really quite close to him. So big questions there, and we'll be discussing this through the show as we learn more information on potentially what could be the cause of this. Do get your thoughts coming in. gbviews@gbnews.com is the address to email.
Yes, but first, it's your headlines with Sophia.
Thanks, Emily. Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 12. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Your top story this hour. Ministers are refusing to call a suspended MP's comments Islamophobic. Senior Conservatives are under growing pressure to explain why Lee Anderson's remarks were wrong after the former deputy chair criticised the London mayor. He's refusing to apologise and maintains Sadiq Khan has lost control of London to a tiny minority of extremists. Mr Anderson says he's simply trying to highlight what he believes is the mayor's failure to tackle pro-Palestine protests. The Conservative Party is facing more backlash after MP Paul Scully claimed there are no-go areas in Birmingham and East London. The former minister made reference to areas with large Muslim communities, which he says he now regrets. West Midlands Mayor Andy Street responded by saying Westminster needs to stop the nonsense slurs. Meanwhile, MPs are warning protests are putting unsustainable pressure on police resources. They're calling on the government to give more support as demonstrations continue over the Israel-Gaza war. A cross-party committee found that policing protests between the 7th of October and the 17th of December last year cost forces more than £25 million. Former Scotland Yard detective Peter Blexley says the marches are having a massive impact on resources.
And the committee has said that organisers of these protests probably should be forced into giving more notice of them because literally they're telling them within days that there's going to be 100,000 or more people on the streets of London. And of course, that's putting huge pressure on the police and their resources.
In other news, there's been no breakthrough on negotiations for a Gaza ceasefire, but Qatar says it remains optimistic. It's after a proposal to swap Israeli hostages for Palestinian prisoners, and it was sent to Hamas. Several days of multinational talks have been held in Paris discussing the possibility of a temporary truce. Reports suggest the deal would see all Israeli women, children under 19, elderly and sick hostages released in exchange for a number of Palestinian prisoners. Underwater experts who supported the search for Nicola Bulley are joining the operation to find a toddler in Leicester. 2-year-old Zilo Maruziva fell into the River Soar 9 days ago while out with his family. Police say the search area is being widened, with teams checking various points along the river. The Home Secretary will call on the international community to take collective action on migration. In a major speech in New York, James Cleverly will urge countries to work together to address root causes and to smash the people smuggling gangs. He'll also say that doing the right thing by migrants doesn't necessarily mean relocating them to the UK. And Labour vows to tackle misogyny in schools if they win the next general election. The party will give teachers the tools to end the scourge of sexual harassment by young men influenced by online misogyny. Under new plans, boys will mentor younger male pupils on how to call out misogyny in classrooms. Recent data from Ofsted found the mention of the term sexual harassment in schools grew by more than 3,000% between 2019 and 2022. Shadow Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson said it's a growing issue.
It is a big problem, and the reports that I hear from students and staff alike is that this can involve bullying online of a sexual nature, misogynistic comments, but also sadly within the classroom as well. So sometimes towards staff or students, unacceptable behaviours, physical intimidation and misogynistic language and attitudes. And I believe we've got a responsibility to tackle it.
Queen Camilla is leading the royal family at memorial services for the late King Constantine of Greece. The Prince of Wales, who was due to deliver a reading at the service, has pulled out due to a personal matter. Kensington Palace didn't elaborate, but confirmed the Princess of Wales, who's recovering from abdominal surgery, continues to be doing well. The King is also missing the service as he continues treatment for cancer. And thousands will gather in Portsmouth later this year as the city becomes the UK's official host to mark 80 years since D-Day. The names of 13 Normandy veterans will be added to the city's memorial wall as part of the commemorations. The Hampshire city played a key role in preparing for the invasion of the Normandy beaches in 1944, a turning point for the war. And for the latest story, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Tom and Emily.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 7 minutes past 12 and the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, has joined calls for Lee Anderson, the former Deputy Chair of the Conservative Party, to apologise after suggesting that Sadiq Khan is controlled by Islamists.
Yes, despite senior Conservatives facing mounting pressure to describe Mr Anderson's comments as Islamophobic, he is refusing to apologise.
Well, this comes as the Liberal Democrats have tabled a motion to call for the former Tory Deputy Chair, Lee Anderson, to come to the House and apologise for his comments about the Mayor of London, also to censure him.
They're all joining in. They're all joining in. Shall we speak to GB News political editor Christopher Hope from Westminster about all this? I also want to get you on Paul Scully and his comments about no-go areas too, which have added to this whole Islamophobia row. But let's start with Lee Anderson. Where does he sit at this moment?
Well, yes, afternoon, Tom. Hi, Emily. Yes, he is weighing up his future as an independent MP. Of course, he was interviewed for Patrick Critter's show last night on this channel by me and Patrick yesterday. He made very clear he's not sure what to do next. He says he's on a journey. Of course, he was a Labour councillor until he became a Tory MP, and the first time he voted Tory was for himself in Ashfield back in 2019 in that election. He's clearly thinking, should he go to Reform UK? We refused to answer that question properly last night. I've been talking to senior Tory MPs just now in Parliament. One MP who knows him quite well says he's 50-50 on going across to Reform UK. Could we see Lee Anderson crossing the floor of the House of Commons tomorrow at PMQs to sit on the independent benches as a Reform UK MP? That is possible. I think James Cleverly's remarks you're reporting there overnight from America are not helpful at all, because he feels he's very clear he has nothing to apologise for in his world. Lee Anderson thinks that he made fair comment about Sadiq Khan. He said his remarks were clumsy, but his point remains the same. This idea of a double standard in policing. He thinks the Mayor of London should speak out more about that. So I think what I'm seeing is the Tory party pushing Lee Anderson into a corner. And what will he do next? Well, it seems to me he could be on the way to joining Reform.
That would be an incredibly significant moment. After all, we had two by-elections just around 2 weeks ago that showed that these reform polling numbers of around 11-12% are bearing themselves out in real votes now for the first time. So some representation in Parliament could be an ignition to that, perhaps, gunpowder ready to blow. But Christopher Hope, this is day 5 now of this story. It's remarkable that it's dragged on from Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. The Liberal Democrats today putting down an early day motion in the House of Commons, a motion of censure. What does this mean?
Well, not much, really. I mean, it's an EDM, an early day motion, like a petition. It says that this House censures the member for Ashfield regarding for his comments regarding the Mayor of London, which were Islamophobic, damaging, divisive and risk bringing the House into disrepute, and calls on Lee Anderson to come to the House and apologise for these remarks. Well, there's more chance, frankly, of a snowflake in June than him saying sorry for these remarks, particularly under pressure from the Liberal Democrats. It's more performative by the Lib Dems. You will see Labour MPs, SNP MPs, and of course Lib Dems signing it, but it will mean little more than that. But I think, there's a question here. Lee Anderson was asked last night. We asked him, will he fight the next election as an MP, as a Tory MP, a Tory candidate? He said, yes, I'll fight the election, and then left a blank. So will he go to Reform UK? That's the question we're all asking at the moment. And elsewhere this morning, I should say, Richard Tice has told another broadcaster, LBC, that he's turned down 2 requests from Tory MPs to join Reform. The question now is, who were they?
Turned down 2 requests. Yes, the question is, who could those 2 be? Absolutely.
And why would he turn them down?
And why would he turn them down?
It doesn't really make much sense to me, Chris.
I mean, Christopher, can I ask you about Paul Scully? Because another Conservative MP who will add to Rishi Sunak's headache today and over the weekend, he's been widely criticised for suggesting there are no-go areas, religious no-go areas in some areas of East London and Birmingham. Now, he's written a pretty curious piece in The Telegraph, actually, where he explains his comments. He seems to see himself as a moderate voice on these types of issues of religious extremism, Islamist extremism and such things. He's now been called an Islamophobe for what he said, and he's suggesting that now he's going to walk away from the conversation altogether and stop his support for these communities. It's quite interesting.
Yes, I've just seen him also in the Portcullis House area of Parliament. He's trying to dial it down a bit. Again, no-go areas is the kind of language which was used during the Troubles and the different sectarian issues there. I mean, it's not a helpful language to use at all, but he's trying to say that some parts of the UK, he maybe doesn't feel comfortable in them. And this is a man who was a minister for London, of course, for during the COVID pandemic, a small business minister who tried to be the Tory candidate to fight the London mayoral elections. I mean, he's quite a moderate Tory, and I think the language here has surprised even his friends, but he's trying to wind it down a bit and trying to explain more of what he meant.
I'm not sure he's winding it down, though he does give some examples. He says that he's talking about vigilante Muslim patrols, which were a vigilante group in Tower Hamlets. He also talks about Hizb ut-Tahrir and their organised protests in East London. So he's giving a bit of an explanation, but then he's saying, well, that's it, I'm gonna leave the conversation. It's all a bit odd.
Yes, although I think he might have wound back to say that he sees why there's the perception of no-go areas rather than saying there are no-go areas in actuality. But there will be much more on this, no doubt, throughout the day. For now, Christopher Hope, thank you very much for joining us here on Good Afternoon Britain.
Good stuff. Well, the Prince of Wales, as we were saying, is no longer attending the memorial service of his godfather, the late King Constantine of Greece, taking place at Windsor Castle today, pulling out due to a personal matter. That's according to Kensington Palace. Well,
the Palace has not released any further information, but confirmed that the Princess of Wales is still recovering well from abdominal surgery. Queen Camilla will lead the royal family at the memorial service.
Well, our royal correspondent Cameron Walker is here with us now. Cameron, I guess we don't know too many details, and why should we?
Well, exactly. I suppose they're saying it's a personal matter for Prince William, and we know he's a very private individual, so we're not elaborating further. I think the big question this morning is, why was it cancelled so last minute? Prince William, as heir to the throne, was due to be giving a reading at this memorial service that ended at around midday today at St George's Chapel in Windsor. He is the godson of the late King Constantine II of Greece, and yet we get a message from Kensington Palace just over an hour ago now, saying that the Prince has pulled out of the service due to a personal matter. Now, I've been assured that it's nothing to do with the Princess of Wales's health. She continues to recover well, as you said in your introduction, from abdominal surgery. I also understand that Prince William's future engagements are unaffected by this, and I quote, personal matter. But now, of course, all these people, everybody's speculating as to what this personal matter could be. I think we're certainly getting a sense of caution from royal sources. They don't want us to go into panic mode, and they're very keen to stress that it's nothing to do with the Princess of Wales. But of course, King Charles has a cancer diagnosis. We also know that it's nothing the reason Prince William's pulled out is nothing to do with the King's health either, but it's got us into a situation where a big royal event where several different European royal families are attending, led by Her Majesty the Queen, is happening in Windsor. Only one of our British senior royals is actually in attendance, which is Queen Camilla, because King Charles has cancer and isn't doing any public engagements. The Princess of Wales obviously has had abdominal surgery and continues to recover, which just leaves Prince William, but then he's pulled out last minute, and that would not have been a decision taken lightly. I think it's a pretty significant personal matter as to why Prince William has decided not to attend quite so last minute.
No, really concerning there. But Cameron, does this show perhaps a fatal flaw in the King's idea of a slimmed-down royal family? Frankly, there are fewer people now to take the slack, and if an unexpected event, like has happened to the Prince of Wales today, does take place, then perhaps they're left in a sticky situation.
Yeah, and to quote Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, who's the King's sister, who was speaking to Canadian television just before the coronation, she said the idea of a slimmed-down monarchy sounded like a much better idea when there were a few more people around, because as we know, Prince Harry and Meghan are no longer working members of the royal family. They're in California, and then Prince Andrew has obviously had to step back as a working member of the royal family in disgrace. But both Prince Andrew and Fergie, Duchess of York, arrives together at this service today in front of all the cameras as well. So let's see how well that went down with Prince William and perhaps other working members of the royal family. But of course, it would have been sanctioned by probably the King and Queen Camilla, and it was a personal, private service. This wasn't a kind of working member of the royal family event, which is why perhaps we saw Prince Andrew and Sarah, Duchess of York, attend.
And lots of people getting in touch, actually, in our inbox saying it's none of our business what's wrong with the Prince of Wales and what his personal matter is. But I guess the royal family has been revealing more about their health and personal matters. It's become almost a norm for us to know a little bit too much detail. So I guess that's why there will be speculation.
Well, quite possibly. I think there's also a clear difference between Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace. It's clearly the King's wish that he gives his public as much medical details as possible, with A, the enlarged prostate, and B, the cancer diagnosis, although we don't know which cancer it is, other than it's not prostate cancer. Kensington Palace do have... They only discuss medical details if it's absolutely necessary. So the fact we know about the Princess of Wales is because A, she was in hospital for pretty big surgery, and she's no longer carrying out engagements until Easter. And they kept very quiet when Prince William had COVID back in 2020. They didn't give us any details until after Prince William had recovered, possibly to stop mass panic. And that is a very clear distinction. Prince William and Catherine are both very private individuals. It's a different type of member of the royal family, as it were. So there is a clear distinction there.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Cameron Walker, our royal correspondent. Great to speak to you. I mean, Tom, look, Brian's just written in. He says, what's all the fuss about? Maybe he just has a toothache or a migraine.
Yes, and Graham has said that please refrain from speculating as to the personal reasons behind his absence from a memorial service. I doubt you would welcome this intrusion into your life.
Well, quite, but I guess the bigger question that you mentioned there is what this says about this slimline royal family. Do we have enough people? Let's speak to former BBC royal correspondent Michael Cole. Michael, Cameron Walker has set the scene very nicely for us, hearing that Prince William has had to pull out of this event, well, very much at the last minute. What's your assessment?
Yeah, he always does. Cameron sets the scene. I hope it's not serious, but I think it is worrying. Let's put it like that. It has been made clear from an unnamed source that the reason for him pulling out of this memorial service for his godfather and second cousin, King Constantine II of Greece, has nothing to do with Kate. And there we see her looking lovelier in happier times. Let's hope it's nothing to do with that. We do not know. I think it is unusual, as you've said, at the last minute to pull out. That said, the royal family was well represented there. Queen Camilla was there. And, of course, other members of the royal family, including the Duke of York and Sarah Ferguson, one of the rare events, royal events, where their presence is not only accepted, but probably welcome, because this is very much a family affair. King Constantine of Greece was very close to the royal family, and all members of his own family were very close and very friendly. Then we see the Duke, was this when he was on the air ambulance? Yeah, there he is with his wingman, Tom Cruise, and he got off a couple of good jokes there. He's been flying solo, of course, since the 17th of January, or that shocking day of double royal announcements of, first of all, the Princess of Wales and then the King going into the London clinic for treatment. And, of course, he's making a brave face of it all. He's affable with everybody. He was a very good, up here in East Anglia, a very excellent pilot of the air ambulance up here, and he saw a lot of terrible things, road accidents and so on. He did the job. And, of course, he was at BAFTA, smiling and schmoozing with the stars on Sunday, but he did look slightly, did you not think, Emily and Tom, a little bit alone, a little bit lost without his wingman, his real wingman in life, Kate. So we don't know what is going on. As I said at the beginning to you both, I hope it's nothing serious, but it is unusual, not unprecedented, but it's unusual at the very last minute. However, being the gentleman that he is, Prince William did make it clear to King Constantine's widow and his heir, Prince Pavlos, that he wouldn't be there. And I'm quite sure that nobody took it untoward. They understood that he had a personal matter and he had to deal with it.
Well, Michael Cole, let's hope that we see him again soon. You're right to remind us we did see him as recently as Sunday. But Michael Cole, former BBC Royal correspondent, thank you for your time.
Well, let's quickly cross over to Poland, where farmers are holding an absolutely massive protest in downtown Warsaw. Now, this is escalating their month-long strike that began 2 weeks ago, and this is all against various EU agricultural policies.
Yes, it follows on from dramatic scenes yesterday in Brussels, where we saw cordons breached and streets ablaze, and in Madrid, with an enormous protest marching down the street. Things have spread now to Eastern Europe and Warsaw, with these farmers gathering. And, of course, right from Spain to Poland and everywhere in between, we have seen these protests erupt from farmers upset, angry and aggrieved at EU agricultural policy.
Yes, they want the Polish government to withdraw from the EU's Green Deal. So that's all the measures to help the environment and climate change, but they so often come at a cost to farmers directly, you know, using land for various things that they weren't intending to.
And producing less food, which means higher prices for consumers.
Well, that indeed, little flare going off there. Red flare, lots of national flags being waved.
We will be, of course, back with this protest and see what develops in Warsaw throughout the programme. But coming up, a report finds protests over the Gaza conflict and the disruptive tactics of some groups are putting unsustainable pressure on police resources. We'll dig into the details.
£25 million it's costing the police so far, apparently.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious?
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa, whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Marnie says being sexy in business is entirely possible and maybe even better.
Well, Marnie, this is something I say is true. I've had to live with this for quite a long time, and I think you can do both. Now, tell me, it's lovely to see you first of all.
Thank you for having me.
In all your gorgeousness. And you're telling me that that often is regarded as something derogatory or something to hold you back. Is that right?
It's just this really unfair thing, this really unfair narrative that women can't do both. Even men can do it, as you know, Eamon. You can do it. You can do it all. And I just think, you know, women are so multifaceted. They can be mothers, they can be sexy, they can be businesswomen, they can be silly, they can be all these different dimensions. And this press push that we have to limit ourselves to one category, it's just unfair.
But do you think that is where some people may be wrong-footed or go wrong to underestimate you?
Exactly. There is that saying, disarm with charm. So, you know, that there is that idea that people do look at someone who cares about how they look, who's perhaps a bit feminine, and underestimate them. But hopefully I proved that wasn't the case in the boardroom.
And thank goodness for Karen Brady. She's definitely upped the glam stakes on the show. And if anybody can prove that you can be sexy and successful in business, I suppose it's her, really. But where do you think most of the criticism comes from? Because I have to say, hard to believe, but when I was younger, I certainly got a bit of this at my old employer, being told that I had to dress a certain way, not to be too sexy, which I found hugely
And we just point out, you were told this by women.
I was told this by a female boss who didn't like me wearing zips on the back of my dress. Not just me, but some of the other presenters there. And I took such offence. I felt like she thought that I was some sort of, I don't know what. Do you take offence when people are criticising you, that, you know, in some way they think you're, I don't know?
There's just no right answer. And as we said, I think Karen Brady is doing an excellent job at leading the charge that you can be glamorous and get the job done.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. 27 minutes past 12, and protest organisers may have to give the police more notice of demonstrations.
Yes, the Home Office has been encouraged to require protest groups to inform the authorities earlier due to the frequency and the scale of demonstrations over the Middle East conflict.
Well, a Home Affairs Committee report found the disruptive tactics of some groups are causing unsustainable pressure on police resources.
Yes, protests between October and December last year cost police forces across the country more than £25 million of your money to police. Well, GB News reporter Charlie Peters joins us now. Charlie, £25 million just so far since October the 9th, I believe that first pro-Palestine protest was. A huge amount of money.
It is significant, and of that 25 million, 18 is a cost being held by the Metropolitan Police, which has about 25% of the budget for policing for England and Wales, where, of course, London is seeing the most significant and high-profile Israel-Gaza protests. And the key finding from this report, as you've mentioned, Tom, is that the committee, the Home Affairs Select Committee, wants the police to have the time of which they can be notified of upcoming protests raised from 6 days. So amid all this concern about cost and the availability of police officers distracting from resources, their main recommendation is quite limited, just improving the number of days required for protesters to alert the authorities of an upcoming demonstration. They've also found that some 4,000 rest days have been lost by police officers in those 3 months while the demonstrations have taken place. This, they say, has detracted from police attention elsewhere and reduced the well-being of police at a time when they are desperately trying to improve their recruitment. And how is this report being received by activists and campaigners? Well, the headline response, I think, has come from the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, which has described the report as disappointing. The report found that it condemned the protests outside MPs' houses, which it says was intimidating and interrupted the democracy in Britain. But the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism has said that British Jews feel the same level of intimidation when these large protests take place. They say that insufficient attention and action is being taken by the police to deal with cries of jihad in British cities, and also incidents like the Yemeni Houthi terrorists' chants being allowed to continue, and also that genocidal chant perceived by many of "from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free," which they say is a call to destroy the Jewish homeland in the Middle East. So amid those concerns, they say, well, MPs are expecting more protection, but British Jews, some 90% of them, are afraid and unwelcome, they feel, in city centres when these major protests take place.
Yeah, well, Charlie Peters, thank you very much for giving us the detail there. It's hugely concerning. You don't think that so many millions of pounds are required to police these demonstrations, but
particularly when they take such a standoffish approach. I mean, I've walked through these protests, and you can see misbehaviour, illegal behaviour, or what you might think is illegal behaviour, and the police just sort of stand there watching. And I know they don't want to incite, you know, mob-like behaviour, but, I mean, come on. When you've got that projection on Big Ben, when you've got people with the most hideous placards, when you've got people draped in face masks that make them look extremely intimidating, the police should probably, you know, do a little more.
But then again, isn't that the point? That when you have numbers such as we see on these protests, people covering their faces, looking intimidating, if you have half a dozen police there and hundreds of intimidating protesters, I can sort of understand why they'd rather step back, take a picture, pursue the arrest later, rather than getting into a dangerous situation there and there.
This annoys me, though, because I don't... They come across as fearful. Now, perhaps that's not fair to say. Perhaps our police are the bravest people out there in the world. But to me, sometimes when I see them standing back, allowing whatever behaviour to go on right in front of their eyes, it does give the impression, at least, that there's a little bit of fear there.
Well, I have no doubt that there is, but you've seen this again and again in statements. The Metropolitan Police will say what we prefer to do in situations that could ignite into something bigger, into something violent, is stand back, record the incident and pursue arrests later. Now,
I don't know, they'd be very quick to try and move on far-right protesters,
They would.
I mean, come on,
isn't
they
that
would.
the interesting thing? When it's not a threatening situation, when it's a lone preacher standing on a street, they'll happily make the arrest because there's not a big threat of violence. And perhaps that's not the way our police should be run, that they're cowed and threatened by violence. But I think that does explain a lot of these policing decisions.
Well, they need to be, you know, they need to know that they have the support coming from the top. I think that's one of the issues. But coming up, reports have emerged that the Ministry of Defence will not get further funding in next week's budget. This despite growing geopolitical tensions, and we're always told of the threat of World War III. Well, we'll be speaking to the former head of MI6. After your headlines with Sophia.
Thanks, Emily. It's 12:33. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Ministers are refusing to call a suspended Tory MP's comments Islamophobic. The Prime Minister says Lee Anderson's comments were wrong because they conflated all Muslims with Islamist extremists. But Rishi Sunak doesn't believe he's racist. The former Deputy Chair is refusing to apologise for criticising the London Mayor and maintains Sadiq Khan has lost control of London to a tiny minority of extremists. The Conservative Party is facing more backlash after MP Paul Scully claimed there are no-go areas in Birmingham and East London. The former minister made reference to areas with large Muslim communities, which he says he now regrets. West Midlands Mayor Andy Street responded by saying Westminster needs to stop the nonsense slurs. Underwater experts who supported the search for Nicola Bulley are joining the operation to find Zilo Marasuvia, the 2-year-old who fell into the River Soar in Leicester 9 days ago. Police say the search area is being widened, with teams checking various points along the river. An 18th century pub that was destroyed in a fire in the West Midlands is set to be rebuilt. The crooked house was demolished 2 days after the blaze last August, causing widespread outrage in the local area. An enforcement notice has been issued against the owner for its unlawful demolition. Local authorities says the building will now be built back to what it was prior to the fire. And Queen Camilla is leading the royal family at memorial services for the late King Constantine of Greece. The Prince of Wales, who was due to deliver a reading at the service, has pulled out due to a personal matter. Kensington Palace didn't elaborate, but confirmed the Princess of Wales, who's recovering from abdominal surgery, is doing well. The King is also missing the service as he continues treatment for cancer. And for the latest story, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
So a new poll has revealed that Gen Z or Gen Z, I don't know how I'm supposed to say it, and British boys and men are more likely to believe that feminism has done more harm than good when compared with older respondents. So the polling also found that a quarter of UK males aged 16 to 29 believe it's harder to be a man than a woman, with 1 in 5 looking favourably upon controversial influencer Andrew Tate. 37% of them also agree that the phrase toxic masculinity is unhelpful. So, with Gen Z boys increasingly holding this view, has feminism done more harm than good? Let me know your thoughts. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.com, tweet me @gbnews, and make sure you take part in our poll. But I'll bring you those results shortly. Going head-to-head on this tonight, our author and commentator Anna May Mangan and YouTuber and social media influencer Pearl Davies. Both of you, thank you very much. Pearl, I'll start with you. Has feminism done more harm than good, especially when it comes to these Gen Z boys?
Yes, it has. Feminism really has turned into a bunch of crybaby women that want to complain that we're not given equal opportunity when really women are given more opportunity than men. And so, yeah, I would say feminism is a hate group and it's a bunch of crybaby women.
Anna, would you like to come back to that? Crybaby women feminism, apparently.
So we've got a right lad with us tonight with Pearl and her opinions, haven't we? How could it possibly do harm? Pearl wouldn't do, I hope you vote. I assume you do. I hope you're not chained to the kitchen sink at home. I'm not sure if you've got a job, so I don't know very much about you, but you're probably, if there's a bloke doing the same thing as you, you're probably earning less than him. So of course feminism is something that it got us the vote in the first place, and it's still doing a power of good. It's just whingy men, and actually I changed that. They're lads, they're not men.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 38 minutes past 12 and some breaking news for you now. According to the Sun newspaper, the BBC has reportedly apologised to the family of the young person at the centre of the Huw Edwards scandal for the way that the broadcaster handled the complaint.
Yes, this comes after The Sun published claims in July last year that BBC star Huw Edwards paid thousands of pounds to a teenager for sexual images. The Welsh star has been suspended, of course, on full pay, though, since the investigation began. So there you go. The BBC has now apologised to the family of the young person, the teenager at the centre of the Huw Edwards scandal, for the way that the broadcaster handled the complaint.
Yes, the BBC presenter is said to have given the young person more than £35,000 since this individual was 17 years old. These details are, of course, all published in the Sun newspaper and created the most enormous media storm.
Yes, and the BBC have been looking into how they can improve all their processes to make sure that this type of thing doesn't happen again. But the BBC has, of course, apologised now. That's the breaking news to the family of the teenager involved in all of this. Well, there you go. There's the breaking news.
But moving on, reports suggest that the Ministry of Defence is not set to get any extra funding in next Wednesday's budget.
The Treasury is likely to argue that stretched public finances will limit the spending in the package unveiled next week by the Chancellor. But this is despite stark warnings about the current state of our armed forces and the growing geopolitical tensions.
Meanwhile, Slovakian Prime Minister Robert Fico has said that EU and NATO countries are considering sending soldiers to Ukraine on a bilateral basis. French President Emmanuel Macron has not ruled out sending French troops, but German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has ruled out sending any ground troops from Germany into Ukrainian territory.
Well, we can now speak with the former head of MI6, Sir Richard Dearlove. Richard, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Are you concerned to read that the Ministry of Defence may not have an increased budget at the time of the budget?
Of course I am. I think that at the moment we have to make some tough choices. And, OK, there isn't sufficient money to go around all the options, but we have to cut things for security and national defence. And I think that's one of the realities that the country is facing at the moment.
That's going to be a pretty hard pill for a lot of people to swallow. Although public spending is, of course, at record highs in this country, people still feel like these services are stretched. And I suppose spending on defence is something that is precautionary and you can't feel the immediate benefits of. Perhaps it's understandable that politicians would rather spend more on another 10,000 nurses than on something that is preventing threats in the future.
But if you're faced by a serious national security threat, what on earth is the point of not having, as it were, a secure base for all other expenditure? OK, this is an argument which has been conducted since Roman times. I think it was Cicero who said the first duty of the government is the security of the state. And traditionalists like me think that we have massively underspent on defence in recent years, and we're now in a dangerously underfunded position. The Navy needs to be bigger. The Army needs more boots on the ground. And, there is always the expense of aircraft as well. So there's no question that this is a priority.
It's quite alarming, actually, if you think about it, that we're not prioritising extra spending for defence, considering all the threats we're constantly talking about and told about by ministers and the government. We've heard from the Ministry of Defence that we're facing huge numbers of threats, not least from Russia in Ukraine, but of course lots has been happening in the Middle East with various conflicts. And now we're saying, oh wait, we can actually do without a boost in expenditure. At the same time, we're told that our army numbers are dwindling. I'm not sure it makes a lot of sense.
I'm afraid it doesn't to someone like me with my background. And, we have to face the fact that we have a major war on the European continent, and that absolutely fundamentally affects the security of the United Kingdom. And, the old adage, if you wish for peace, prepare for war. We need larger, more significant armed forces. We need more boots on the ground. One of the lessons of the war in Ukraine is the importance of soldiers, maybe more important in some respects than equipment. There's a balance there, but we just haven't got large enough armed forces at the moment.
So, Richard, what do you make of these sort of hints and remarks from various European leaders about European soldiers going to fight in Ukraine, about soldiers from NATO countries going to fight in Ukraine. Is there a real risk of spillover from this conflict, that we and the Americans and the Canadians and everyone else in NATO could be drawn in?
There's a risk of spillover if there's some sort of accidental confrontation, but I do not believe at the moment that a NATO member country, even on a bilateral arrangement, is going to deploy soldiers into the conflict in Ukraine, and that Ukrainians themselves don't want that. They need equipment, they need funds, and they say quite clearly, we're here to do the fighting. We don't want you to do it for us. So I think some of these statements at the moment are probably rather misleading. There'll certainly be some advisors out of uniform there on a contract or individual basis. I mean, I don't know the details. That's a speculative comment, but I'm pretty sure that there will be people there. That's different. But the idea, I mean, the Slovak Prime Minister has just alleged some sort of deployment of armed forces actually into the conflict from Western Europe. Personally, I just don't believe it. It's not going to happen. Not at the moment. Absolutely not.
Well, that's a reassuring note to end on. So Richard Dearlove, former head of MI6, really appreciate your time here on Good Afternoon Britain. Thanks for coming on.
Very interesting indeed. Very interesting indeed. Why would we not put more money into defence?
Well,
could there be anything more critical than that?
One of the arguments, though, is just the amount that we put in now. Is it being spent in the right way? We know the procurement is a disaster. We know that our aircraft carriers that we've spent billions on can't get out of harbour.
Well, that's a very good point too. That's a very good point. But coming up, we're looking ahead to a major speech from the Home Secretary in which he'll call for an international push to address global migration. What exactly will he say? You're watching Good Afternoon Britain on GB News with the People's Channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Welcome to the show. Superb stuff, great footage. So you're right in the thick of it there. What's the mood on the ground?
Well, I've left there now. I've actually now come to that EU Council summit that I was talking about. It's still pretty chaotic. The entire city of Brussels has been completely clogged with these tractors, sort of three abreast in most of the roads across the city. The people of Brussels aren't particularly happy. I mean, this is sort of reminiscent for some people of the Just Stop Oil protests, you know, people gluing themselves. People are unable to get to hospital appointments, and there's a lot of upset about the destruction that's happening on the streets of Brussels today. But on the other side, there's also the protests, which the farmers are saying that EU green laws simply are not able to fit with what they need to do to keep their businesses going. And just before the protests happened, we saw the European Commission actually make some concessions to the farmers' protests. And this is on the demands that were put on them to set aside somewhere in the region of 5% of their land for regrowing for biodiversity. A lot of the farmers have said that's not possible, and the European Commission has said that they can delay that coming in. So they have won a small concession with these protests.
And Jack, there's a feeling as well, a huge dissatisfaction that the European Union has managed to find 50 billion euros in aid to send to Ukraine, and yet farmers in particular are on the receiving end of net zero targets, taxation on diesel and endless red tape. So many farmers, Jack, saying they're measuring ditches to see if they have to drain them or not. There are minimum requirements on the width of battery hen enclosures, endless red tape. As Jeremy Clarkson pointed out in Clarkson's farm in Britain, they've simply had enough, and they're shouting, Ursula von der Leyen, we are here.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 12:49. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain. Now, the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, will lead an international push to address global migration in a major speech today.
During a two-day visit to the United States, the Home Secretary will outline how this global issue can only be met with global action to reform migration policy and urge the international community to unite in facing this challenge.
Right, well, joining us now is GB News Home and Security Editor Mark White. Mark, thank you very much. Is this an exceptional speech that he's making today? Who will be there, who will be listening, and what might he say?
Yeah, I mean, it's at the Carnegie Institute in New York, and I think it's an important speech. He raises an important issue, which is the need for countries around the world really to get together to tackle what is a global crisis. Now, he says that really it needs the same kind of effort and enthusiasm that countries and individuals have adopted in dealing with the climate crisis. But of course, we know that there are many people who are probably less enthusiastic about necessarily talking about just how significant the immigration crisis is or will be in the years ahead. But we know that there have been estimates of at least 1 billion people over the coming years who will be on the move for a variety of reasons, be that war or famine, lack of opportunities at home and alike. And James Cleverly in this speech will say that it really needs an international effort for countries to come together to look at ways in which they can try to make more of an impact and give opportunities, he says, to people in countries that they're leaving to come to the likes of the US or the UK or wherever they might be headed. Now, on that score, of course, he's talking about more investment in a lot of these countries. Well, this comes at a time, of course, as far as the UK is concerned, where the international development budget has been cut quite significantly, and no indication as yet that that's going to be increased anytime soon.
Is he not talking about trade, though, more than aid?
Well, he's talking about trade opportunities, but he's also talking about giving these countries the kind of opportunity that they need in terms of being able to build the infrastructure, the training that these people who are living in these countries can then adopt and then realise opportunities within that country rather than looking overseas to move. But of course, we know it's not just down to the economics. There are other issues at play that are drivers for people leaving their country, and that can be down to very dysfunctional governments as well, threats at home, war and famine, as we discuss. So it's not necessarily just about giving them opportunities in terms of trade.
Well, Mark White, just one final question for you. Is this the culmination of really what we've seen for many, many years? We saw Tony Blair call for a change to the international migration system. We've seen Emmanuel Macron call for it too. Are we now reaching a point where perhaps these old 1950s treaties could actually be updated?
Well, it's certainly possible, and one of the issues that he will raise as well is a need for the global community to look at human rights laws, for instance, that were refugee laws that were put in place, of course, for a different era, and that really are not fit for purpose when it comes to the modern era. So that's one thing they're looking at. I mean, he's saying as well, of course, that the UK government is leading the way when it comes to migration policy. I think there's many people that might disagree with that, given what we've been seeing in terms of the small boats crisis, for instance. He says that Rwanda is a groundbreaking policy, but it's 2 years almost since that policy was announced. Not a single flight has left for Rwanda. So, you know, some people would suggest that perhaps the British government, in terms of its migration policy, is not as leading as James Cleverly might seem to suggest.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your time. Mark White, our Home and Security Editor there.
It does seem that politicians have always pointed to the fact that there were treaties drawn up after the Second World War that applied to the movement of tens of thousands of people. But we're looking at the movement of potentially 1 billion people now. And are these systems, are these structures where you have to automatically let in anyone from any troubled part of the world, are they fit for purpose in a day, in an age of mass migration?
Well, there's a question. I think not. But coming up, we're debating, is it wrong to say there are no-go areas in the UK? Of course, this relates to Paul Scully MP's comments that got him into quite a bit of trouble. This is Good Afternoon Britain. We're on GB News, Britain's news channel.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good afternoon, welcome to your latest GB News weather update with me, Annie, from the Met Office. Rain will continue to push southwards through the rest of the day, and that's because we do have a weather front sinking into northern areas of England and parts of Wales and the Midlands by this afternoon. That's going to be bringing that spell of cloudier and wetter weather. Behind it, though, it will turn much drier and clearer, but that drizzly rain will sink into parts of the southeast to end the day. It does turn clearer and drier behind that rain, but we also see a risk of some mist and fog and low cloud developing by the early hours. That is most likely across central and southern areas of England, but parts of Scotland as well as parts of southern Wales are likely to see some of that mist and fog to develop as well. So it will be a chilly start. Frost will be a little bit more limited than this morning, however, and there will be some sunshine first thing across eastern areas of England as well as eastern areas of Scotland, but quite quickly across the west it will turn wet and cloudier, but as well as across northern areas. But the most persistent rain will push into parts of Wales and southwest England. For many of us, though, it will start to feel milder as the day moves on, as we get a more southerly wind direction develop. Another band of rain pushes southeastwards through Thursday, bringing some wet weather to more central and southeastern areas. Behind it, though, it will turn more unsettled, so there's a risk of showers for the rest of the week for most areas, but temperatures will also dip down much closer or a little bit below average to end the week.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
Questions to be answered, and there seem to be a significant amount, does once again point its way to a public inquiry into exactly what happened in this case. Starmer's called for that. Would you call for that too?
I certainly think that first of all, there's one thing that's happening now. The NHS have to order an independent inquiry. That's been done. So they've got to look at all the whys and wherefores of what happened with this man. If it appears that we're not getting sufficient depth and breadth to this, then I think having an inquiry with all the powers that brings would be extremely advantageous. What I don't want is some long-winded inquiry that will take years, by which time other people will have been put at risk and maybe other lives have lost. We know what the problems are here, Camilla. Law's been passed on this. This is all about making sure on the ground we implement the highest degree of monitoring in order to ensure the safety of the public.
Has care in the community failed? I mean, it seems oxymoronic to say that it's care in the community in this case. We know that the number of psychiatric care beds has been slashed from 52,000 back in 2001 to 24,000 now. I've anecdotally, because I wrote my column about this in The Telegraph yesterday, received quite a lot of correspondence from people saying the situation with care in the community is dire. People aren't being adequately monitored. Was it a mistake to close down all of those mental institutions?
I don't think we should go back to those days when we had those appalling institutions where we just lock people away and forget about them, and not just mental health people, but autistic people and disabled people. Horrific way to treat individuals, and you know I campaign on that a lot.
I know.
However, I think if we move into a more community-based approach, which can be really good for many, many people who are on the spectrum and on that scale of mental health, we have to remember there will be a small but significant number who will continue to pose a danger.
Okay.
And that's why monitoring is so important.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Tuesday, the 27th of February.
Lee Anderson has refused to rule out defecting to the Reform Party as the row over his Islamist comments enters its fourth day. Home Secretary James Cleverly has called on the former Tory deputy chairman to apologise, and now the Liberal Democrats have tabled a motion of censure in the House of Commons.
And Prince William has dramatically pulled out of attending his godfather's memorial service due to what the palace are calling personal reasons. The last-minute announcement is raising eyebrows, though, among some royal watchers.
No-go areas. Another Tory Islamophobia row after an MP refers to places in Birmingham and London with large Muslim communities as unsafe. He's been criticised by MPs in his own party, but some say he's made fair comment. We'll debate the issue, hearing from both sides of the argument.
Well, what do we make of these no-go area comments? Of course, many people have suggested that it's Islamophobic and bigoted and whatnot, that Paul Scully said this about some areas of East London, I think he said, and areas of Birmingham, including Sparkhill.
Well, I suppose it all depends on your definition of what a no-go area is. I mean, any fool can see there are some parts of some of our big cities in the UK that you wouldn't want to walk through at night or wouldn't be as comfortable walking through at night as compared to other areas. I mean, I think that you'd have to be, frankly, fairly moronic to not think that.
I think he's talking about... It's the religious element, though, that's the controversial element, because he said it's due to... the highly Muslim-populated communities. Now, he has clarified somewhat what he said, and he did say this is because there have been vigilante groups called the Muslim Vigilantes, I think it is, he said, who have been out in areas of East London. You can check that for me.
Muslim Patrols.
Muslim Patrols. And also he talked about Hizb ut-Tahrir, the now proscribed terror group, Islamist group,
with organised
protesting.
protests.
So he's talking about pockets.
Yes, and I think his new clarified comments, which he released this morning, seem to row back a little bit from his comments yesterday. He talked about no-go areas in their entirety yesterday. Now he's saying the impression of no-go areas has been given by some of these groups, these Muslim Patrols and Hizb ut-Tahrir, which is a little bit different to what he was saying yesterday. But I think perhaps rings more true.
He also talked about how he's a moderate voice and now he's going to bow out after he's been told he's an Islamophobe from some within the community.
Whatever that means.
Whatever that means. But yes, let us know. Do you think that there are no-go areas in this country? Perhaps you live near one, or one where you'd perceive it to be a no-go area. Do you think that's a bit of an outrageous thing to say? Let us know. gbviews@gbnews.com. We're going to be debating it in just a little bit, but first, your headlines.
Tom, Emily, thank you. It's 1:02. I'm Sophia Wenslet in the GB newsroom. Ministers are refusing to call a suspended Tory MP's comments Islamophobic. The Prime Minister has reiterated his views, saying Lee Anderson's remarks about the London mayor were wrong because they conflated all Muslims with Islamist extremists, but he doesn't believe he's a racist. The former deputy chair is refusing to apologise and maintains Sadiq Khan has lost control of London to a tiny minority of extremists. Mr Anderson says he's simply trying to highlight what he believes is the mayor's failure to tackle pro-Palestine protests. And the Conservative Party is facing more backlash after MP Paul Scully claimed there were no-go areas in Birmingham and East London. The former minister made reference to areas with large Muslim communities, which he says he now regrets. West Midlands Mayor Andy Street responded by saying Westminster needs to stop the nonsense slurs. Meanwhile, MPs are warning protests are putting unsustainable pressure on police resources. They're calling on the government to give more support as demonstrations continue over the Israel-Gaza war. A cross-party committee found that policing the protests between the 7th of October and the 17th of December last year cost forces more than £25 million. Former Scotland Yard detective Peter Blexley says the marches are having a massive impact on resources.
And the committee has said that organisers of these protests probably should be forced into giving more notice of them, because literally they're telling them within days that there's going to be 100,000 or more people on the streets of London. And of course, that's putting huge pressure on the police and their resources.
In other news, there's been no breakthrough on negotiations for a Gaza ceasefire, but Qatar says it remains optimistic. It's after a proposal to swap Israeli hostages for Palestinian prisoners was sent to Hamas. Several days of multinational talks have been held in Paris discussing the possibility of a temporary truce. Reports suggest the deal would see all Israeli women, children under 19, elderly and sick hostages released in exchange for a number of Palestinian prisoners. The BBC has apologised to the family embroiled in the Huw Edwards scandal over the way their complaint was handled. It follows claims the news presenter paid for explicit photos of a teenager. A review into how non-editorial complaints are handled identified a number of failures and says there's a greater need for greater consistency when it comes to addressing concerns. The report found the initial complaint about Edwards was not logged on the relevant case management system, so could not be seen by senior figures. An 18th century pub that was destroyed in a fire in the West Midlands is set to be rebuilt. The Crooked House was demolished 2 days after the blaze last August, causing widespread outrage in the local area. An enforcement notice has been issued against the owners for its unlawful demolition. Local authorities say it'll now be rebuilt back to its original state. And underwater experts who supported the search for Nicola Bulley are joining the operation to find a toddler in Leicester. 2-year-old Xylo Marasiva fell into the River Soar 9 days ago while out with his family. Police say the search area is being widened, with teams checking various points along the river. The Home Secretary will call on the international community to take collective action on migration. In a major speech in New York, James Cleverly will urge countries to work together to address root causes and to smash the people smuggling gangs. He'll also say that doing the right thing by migrants doesn't necessarily mean relocating them to the UK. And the Prince of Wales has been forced to pull out of an event due to a personal matter. Queen Camilla is leading the royal family, attending a memorial service for the late King Constantine of Greece. Prince William was due to deliver a reading at the service for the monarch, who was his godfather. Kensington Palace didn't elaborate, but confirmed the Princess of Wales, who's recovering from abdominal surgery, is doing well. The King is also missing the service as he continues treatment for cancer. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Tom and Emily.
It's 1:07 now. The Home Secretary James Cleverly has joined calls for Lee Anderson to apologise. That's after he suggested Sadiq Khan is controlled by Islamists.
Despite senior Conservatives facing mounting pressure to describe Mr Anderson's attacks on Khan as quote-unquote Islamophobic, the former Tory deputy chair is refusing to take back his comments.
Yes, and this all comes as the Liberal Democrats table a motion to call for the former Tory deputy chair Lee Anderson to come to the House and apologise for his remark about the Mayor of London.
Well, former Liberal Democrat Minister Norman Baker joins us now. Norman, this is a bit of a stunt by the Liberal Democrats, isn't it? An early day motion doesn't really have any sort of effect in the House of Commons. It's just a bit of a petition, really.
Well, early day motions don't have an effect, and but nevertheless, MPs table hundreds and thousands of them every parliamentary session. So you could look at it in those terms. Look, I mean, what Lee Anderson said was wrong, as in fact the Prime Minister's used that word. Sadiq Khan, whatever you think about him in terms of his morality, is not in the clutches of extremists or Islamists. So it's simply not true. I mean, Sadiq Khan, who was not my party, of course, spends most of the time looking at transport issues, as far as I can tell. So now Lee Anderson has said that he doesn't want to apologise because he stands by his remarks, and in that sense, fair enough. I mean, if he now realises he shouldn't have said those things, and I think he ought to realise that, then he should apologise. But if he genuinely holds the view that he was right, then he shouldn't apologise because that would be insincere.
Yes, I agree with you on that one, Norman. Isn't it what we want? Politicians who stand by their words, whatever the repercussions.
Yes, and I think if he genuinely thinks he's right, then fair enough. I think he's totally wrong, but that's just my personal view. What I would say is that there's unfortunate when people pour petrol on flames. And the fact of the matter is we have appalling behaviour by Hamas in massacring Israeli citizens, but equally we've got appalling behaviour, in my view, from Benjamin Netanyahu in the way that Gaza has been treated subsequently. So I think we should be concentrating on the extremists on either side and recognising that the vast majority of Jewish people and the vast majority of Muslim people want none of this behaviour.
Just to row back a second to where Lee Anderson's comments were based, he also, of course, said that he thought that Sir Keir Starmer was controlled by Islamists. I think he's subsequently said that he regrets the phraseology he used, but the point he was trying to get across was that Labour politicians, from the Mayor of London to the leader of His Majesty's loyal opposition, are too weak to face down some of the more extreme elements of these protests. Is that an Islamophobic notion in and of itself? Is that a notion of anti-Muslim prejudice in and of itself?
I don't think so, but I think it's absolute nonsense. I mean, Keir Starmer has demonstrated by his behaviour, if anything, that he's bending over backwards to not repeat the mistakes of Jeremy Corbyn. And I think many in the Labour Party and outside the Labour Party feel he should have been more forceful in terms of condemning the behaviour of the Israeli defence forces in Gaza.
It's frustrating, though, isn't it? Because the issue of Islamist extremism is a very real one. We know that from the MI5's caseload, and we know that from our counter-terrorism programmes. And instead, what the public are seeing is politicians rowing over what one MP said. We've also heard, we've also got an ongoing row over what Paul Scully said now about no-go areas. That's been called Islamophobic too. And I think, I would hazard a guess that most people in this country would much rather we talked about the threat of Islamist extremism and what a future Labour government might do about it and what our current government will do about it.
I don't think it's helpful to try and force people into boxes of other people's descriptions, which is what I think is happening on both sides at the moment. It's wrong to try and force Lee Anderson into a box, and it's wrong to try and force Sadiq Khan into a box. It just simply doesn't work. I think what most people want is peace in the Middle East, a two-state solution where the Israelis and Palestinians can live in harmony. Very difficult to get to that point, but that's what they actually want. And I think we should be concentrating on that rather than trying to pick up.
But what about the threat here? That's what people are concerned about. The threat here of extremism.
Well, I mean, there's the threat from both the extreme left and the extreme right in this country. There always has been. Yes, there are probably Islamic extremists who pose a threat to our way of life, but equally there are people on the far right who pose a threat. And the MI5 caseload will demonstrate that. If you listen to speeches from the head of MI5, you'll find out that the threat from the far right occupies them a great deal.
A great deal, but nowhere near the proportion of Islamist terror threats. I mean, as a former Home Office minister, are you concerned that quabbles in the Middle East and serious fighting in the Middle East is to some extent spilling over onto the streets of Britain?
Yes, it is. I mean, it is absolutely. And as I say, it's spilling over on both sides, whereby Jewish people are being subject to intimidation quite improperly and wrongly. But equally, Muslims are being subject to allegations which are completely unfounded. The vast majority of Jewish people and Muslim people are perfectly law-abiding in this country, and we need to hang on to that.
Yes, but I think some of our politicians have a very hard time talking about the extremes, and they want to close their eyes to it and pretend it's not happening. And it's much easier to talk about Lee Anderson and his comments and allow that to dominate their Twitter feed and dominate the airwaves than to actually talk about the issue. That's what's frustrating, Norman.
Yeah, well, people do want to sometimes behave in that way, but others want to, it seems to me, stoke the fires by trying to label entire groups in a way that's inappropriate. I just think we have to calm the temperature down.
Yes, well, thank you very much indeed. Norman Baker, always great to speak to you, former Liberal Democrat Minister, of course.
Well, before the break, we were looking ahead to James Cleverly, the Home Secretary, his speech in New York, this addressing global migration. It comes as the continuous Bibby Stockholm barge finds itself embroiled in yet another dispute.
Yes, the Portland Mayor, Carolyn Parks, is bringing a judicial review against Dorset Council, challenging the local authority over having no planning authority to house asylum seekers on the Bibby Stockholm barge. It rumbles on.
Well, joining us now from the Royal Courts of Justice is GBNews reporter Ray Addison. And Ray, what's the complaint here? What are the specifics?
Well, to be specific, Carolyn Parks is bringing this case in her private capacity despite being the mayor of Portland in Dorset. She essentially is saying that it's wrong that the Home Office continues to avoid planning control over the Bibby Stockholm barge by claiming that it's on Crown land. Now, Dorset Council says that they do not have authority over this area of land in the harbour. She argues that they do, and that's basically why we're here at the High Court to decide who has authority over that territory. This is going to be, by the looks of it, a 3-day hearing. Now, in her claim, Miss Parks is arguing that the Bibby Stockholm barge is engineless, it's permanently moored in Portland Harbour, and therefore she says it should be treated essentially like a pier, and therefore should be subject to council planning law. She says if that fails, Dorset Council should actually consider planning enforcement over the change of use of the access road that is used to gain access to the Bibby Stockholm, and also the finger pier that connects to the barge. And we've all seen those images of asylum seekers being brought along that finger pier and then up the gantry to the Bibby Stockholm. Now, Ms Parks is also arguing that the barge is hugely expensive. She says it's dangerous as well, and she says that the experience of those who are accommodated on the Bibby Stockholm has shown how disastrous this plan has always been. Of course, we saw tragically in December one man took his own life on that barge. Now, Parks is arguing that if the barge is allowed to stay in Portland Harbour, more men will be suffering depression, isolation, overcrowding and deteriorating mental health. And essentially she wants the barge to be closed for good and towed back out of Portland Harbour.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Ray Addison, for bringing us that outside the Royal Courts of Justice.
No, really interesting. Treating a boat as a building.
Not going to back down on this Bibby Stockholm barge, are they? They want it out.
People just don't want migrants anywhere, whether it's old disused RAF bases, hotels, private rented accommodation, barges. I mean, while they're here, they have to go somewhere, surely.
Well, quite, but where? Now, Prince William has unexpectedly pulled out of attending a memorial service for his godfather, the late King Constantine of Greece, due to a personal matter.
The palace confirmed Prince William has called the Greek royal family to let them know he's unable to attend, but hasn't elaborated on the matter. The Princess of Wales, who's recovering from abdominal surgery, continues to be doing well, so say palace sources. Well, Queen Camilla will lead the royal family at the memorial service.
Well, our royal correspondent Cameron Walker joins us now. Cameron, Prince William, very last-minute announcement.
Yeah, it absolutely was, and unexpected, bearing in mind King Constantine of Greece was Prince William's godfather. Prince William was also due to give a reading at the service at St George's Chapel in Windsor, so his name presumably would have been printed on the order of service. And then we find out that Prince William has pulled out last minute due to a personal matter. Now, as you can probably imagine, lots of alarm bells started ringing on various fronts, but we have been assured that the Princess of Wales is still recovering well from her abdominal abdominal surgery. Of course, we're not expected to see her until Easter. King Charles has been diagnosed with cancer, as we know. He was therefore not expected to attend this service, but I am also told that Prince William's absence is nothing to do with King Charles's health either. Kensington Palace are not going into any further details, although I do understand that Prince William's future engagements are unaffected by this personal matter. It is just today that has been affected, but it does show that this slimmed-down monarchy is incredibly slim, because we've only got Queen Camilla as the British senior member of the royal family representing that family at this service, where we have royal families across Europe turn up to Windsor to pay tributes to this memorial for King Constantine II. So this slimmed-down monarchy is incredibly slim today, incredibly slim indeed today, and it does show perhaps the fragility of that kind of royal family.
A lot of people across the country will be deeply concerned about what this issue is with the Prince of Wales. It seems that, to some extent, Buckingham Palace has been a lot more open about private matters than Kensington Palace has been.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say, Tom. I mean, they've been incredibly open, Buckingham Palace, about the King's health, with first the enlarged prostate and then the cancer diagnosis. Kensington Palace really only confirms that the Princess of Wales was in hospital for abdominal surgery because, of course, they had to, because it meant that she's been out of action for months already and isn't expected to be seen until Easter. And Kensington Palace do have form for this, because when Prince William had COVID in 2020, they also kept pretty silent. So it does show the differences between the two royal households.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Cameron Walker, our royal correspondent, of course. I think unless it's something major, we don't need to know.
Yes. But then again, there's a bit of me that does sort of want to know and want to make sure that everything's fine. And
it's not just nosiness.
It's worry. It's worry for the state of the sort of constants and continuity that our royal family provide for us in Britain.
Yes, that's very true. But coming up, another Tory Islamophobia row. MP Paul Scully has said areas in Birmingham and London with large Muslim communities are no-go areas. Does he have a point? We'll hear both sides of this rather controversial debate very shortly. You're watching Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World. Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones, who's the clinical lead for Care After Combat.
Yep.
Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity, who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system and...
So there's quite a high population of ex-servicemen and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. Yeah. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr. Jane, and I guess for some people, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 23 minutes past 1. And do you feel that there are neighbourhoods in the UK which are no-go areas?
Well, that's what former Government Minister Paul Scully claimed in a media interview yesterday, referring to Spark Hill in Birmingham and Tower Hamlets in London as places people aren't safe. Both have large Muslim populations, and it's put the Tory party at the heart of yet another Islamophobia row.
MPs within his own party, as well as the Conservative Mayor of the West Midlands, Andy Street, have condemned Scully's comments, and to some extent he's later clarified them, saying he meant that there's the impression of no-go areas in these places. But what are no-go areas, and frankly, do they exist in the United Kingdom? And should we be talking about them? We're joined now by the sociologist Dr. Lisa Mackenzie, who says the only no-go areas in Britain are gated communities, and the director of the Common Sense Society, Emma Webb, who agrees with Paul Scully's comments. Well, Emma, since you're agreeing with Paul Scully, let's hear your argument first.
Well, I think the first thing to say is, do Jews count? Because there are certainly places in this country where a Jewish person who's visibly Jewish, who might be wearing traditional Jewish clothing, would not be safe to go. I've never been to Spark Hill in Birmingham, but I know for sure that there are certain parts of London where I wouldn't feel safe, and particularly where it wouldn't be safe if you, like I say, if you were a Jewish person to go. So I think that Paul Scully is wrong in his condemnation of Lee Anderson's comments, because I don't think that what Lee Anderson said was Islamophobic either. I don't think it's right to condemn what Paul Scully said, because we have known this for a very long time, that we have what has been referred to as plural monoculturalism, societies that are not, it's not really a multicultural society, it's just closed communities that live side by side. And some of those, this has been an ongoing issue that various people have pointed out, including Baroness Cox, over the course of many years, where women's rights in particular are affected in some of these communities because Sharia law is so dominant. So I think it would be disingenuous to suggest that this isn't a problem. Now, you may disagree if you think that what he means is that you simply cannot go into these areas. Of course you can, but there may be places, whether it's for community reasons, than being a particularly strong monoculture in a particular area, or whether it's because of crime, because I know that there are for sure parts of London where I wouldn't feel safe going at night.
Emma,
and that's the problem we need to address.
Paul Scully was very much talking about religious no-go areas. He said there are no-go areas mainly because of doctrine, mainly because of people abusing in many ways their religion. And he goes on and he says this is a concern that needs to be addressed. Seems like he was maybe going a bit around the houses with what he actually meant there, but he's very much talking about religious elements causing this no-go area. But Lisa, let's get your views. You've made the comment that it's actually gated communities that are the only no-go areas. Can you back that up?
Yeah, and first of all, can I just say that I imagine being Jewish in the country at the moment is very difficult. So I'm not taking that away from any Jewish person and how they feel at the moment in the country. I'm not going to take that away. I imagine that it is very worrying. But regarding gated communities, the only places that I used to live in Tower Hamlets. I lived there for 7 years. And the only places in and around London, and actually where I live now in Nottingham, where I cannot go are those that have either got private security that roam around them, or they are gated communities. Everywhere else, I am free to go. Whether does that mean that there are communities and there are areas in the country that do suffer from crime, and also, when those people phone the police, that the police don't come? That is also true. But if we're looking at no-go areas in particular...
As a woman myself, I do refuse to believe that there aren't areas in London and other cities where you don't feel safe. You must be much stronger than me.
No, I mean, look, as a woman, it doesn't matter where you are in the country. You have to, let's be honest, as a woman, you have to be aware of what you're doing. Being a woman in Britain at the moment you can feel very unsafe. And let's remember that, you know, it was a police officer that sort of baited, raped and murdered a woman in the lockdown. So, you know, this doesn't refer to one community or another. Being unsafe as a woman is a reality. So I'm not going to deny that at all. But that doesn't connect to, I suppose, this argument around Islamophobia. Like I said, I lived in Tower Hamlets for 7 years. I didn't feel that it was a no-go area. You know, I heard the call for prayer every Friday at the East London Mosque. And you know, I didn't feel threatened by any of that.
Emma, what do you make of this, that perhaps there are areas where certain communities or certain genders might feel less safe in the United Kingdom, but it's not linked directly to areas with any particular religion?
There are parts of the country where, particularly the Islamic community, they're very orthodox, where an uncovered woman walking through an area of women who are completely covered up would, of course, feel not welcome. So I just think it's, you know, we need our politicians to be straightforward about this. It's not Islamophobic to criticise Islam, Islamic doctrine, certain Islamic traditions, and all religions should be open to criticism in that way in a free country. That is what it means to live in a free country. And what we see time and time again is the term Islamophobia used to shut down legitimate criticism of anything relating to Islam. And in the case of Lee Anderson's criticisms of Sadiq Khan, Islamophobia is being used to try to shut down debate over Palestine. And I think the fact is that we know that Sadiq Khan is in hock to these protesters because he agrees with them. He's been very, very unequivocal in saying that he agrees with what the protesters are asking for. So I think it's disingenuous to suggest that either Paul Scully or Lee Anderson's comments are Islamophobic.
Lisa, oh, sorry.
But that's not the debate here, though, is it? The debate here is about no-go areas. And, you know, if we are being completely honest, there are only a few places in the country that are no-go areas. Actually, there is a place in London, right outside City Hall. It's owned by the Qataris, and you walk down that side of the Thames with permission from the Qataris that can take that permission away from you at any point. And actually, they did take that permission away from me once for protesting at the Shard. So there are definite no-go areas, but they, you know, in my experience, they are not linked to religion.
Lisa, what do you make of the argument that Emma was putting forward to some extent, that there are areas where there's a very orthodox Muslim community and everyone is dressing very conservatively, and if you were to walk down there in a miniskirt, you might feel like you were being told to go away? Do you think that if there was sort of a rural, conservative Christian community that was sort of forcing young women who dressed less conservatively out, that would be treated in the same way as an Orthodox Muslim community that was doing that?
But I'm not sure that is happening. Like I said, I lived in Bethnal Green.
I mean, Lisa,
for 7
I have
years.
actually experienced it myself. I probably shouldn't say, but I have been told to cover up by a couple of Muslim men in East London.
And if that is happening, and if that has happened...
I'm not saying it happens all the time. I'm not saying it happens all the time, but I have experienced it.
If that has happened in Britain, then, you know, those people need to mind their own business and get on with their own lives, because, you know, that is not who we are in Britain. That's not what we should be. And all I'm saying is that I think sometimes we can sort of get too carried away with this idea that, you know, there are no-go areas. There are definite points in the country where different groups may feel unsafe, including homosexuals. There may be areas that could feel safe. That isn't right, and we should be focusing on that. But I think by saying that this is related to religion and they are absolute no-go areas, that's not helping the conversation.
Well, thank you very much indeed for that fantastic debate, Emma Webb and Lisa McKenzie there. Great to speak to you both.
Emily, can I just say, that was incredibly brave of you to say. It shouldn't be a brave thing for you
Well,
to
I probably
say.
shouldn't have said it, because I don't want to, you know, cause any trouble.
But more people
that's
should
true.
speak up when they face things like that, and you should be...
Well, thanks for the spot. It was a long time ago. It was a long time ago, to be fair. And no, I was not wearing a mini skirt.
No, it's probably just short sleeves, isn't it? Moving on. In response to the Conservative MP Paul Scully, Tower Hamlets Council have said his comments were surprising and extremely disappointing, adding it's one of the most popular places in the country to live, work and visit, and they are an example of how people of all backgrounds get on together.
Yeah, so Martin Daubney will be speaking to Tory MP Scully right after 3 o'clock. So look forward to that, see what he has to say for himself. And coming up, the latest from Westminster as Sir Keir Starmer faces a possible probe over claims he put pressure on Speaker Lindsay Hoyle over the Gaza debate in the Commons.
That's to come after your headlines.
Thanks, Tom. It's 1:33. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Your headlines. Ministers are refusing to call a suspended Tory MP's comments Islamophobic. The Prime Minister says Lee Anderson's comments were wrong because they conflated all Muslims with Islamist extremists. But Rishi Sunak doesn't believe he's a racist. The former Deputy Chair is refusing to apologise for criticising the London Mayor and maintains Sadiq Khan has lost control of London to a tiny minority of extremists. The Conservative Party is facing more backlash after MP Paul Scully claimed there were no-go areas in Birmingham and East London. The former minister made reference to areas with large Muslim communities, which he says he now regrets. West Midlands Mayor Andy Street responded by saying Westminster needs to stop the nonsense slurs. The BBC has apologised to the family embroiled in the Huw Edwards scandal over the way their complaint was handled. It follows claims the news presenter paid for explicit photos of a teenager. A review into how non-editorial complaints are handled identified a number of failures and says there's a need for greater consistency when it comes to addressing concerns. The Crooked House pub, which was destroyed by a fire in the West Midlands, is set to be rebuilt. Locals were outraged when it was demolished just 2 days after the blaze last August. An enforcement notice has now been issued against the owners for its unlawful demolition, with authorities ordering it to be restored to its original state. And Queen Camilla has attended a memorial service for King Constantine of Greece. The Prince of Wales, who was due to deliver a reading at the service, was forced to pull out due to a personal matter. Kensington Palace didn't elaborate, but confirmed the Princess of Wales, who's recovering from abdominal surgery, is doing well. The King also missed the service as he continues treatment for cancer. And for the latest story, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2680 and €1.1682. The price of gold is £1,606.55 per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 7,683 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Carson, this Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Lots of people very concerned about what's happening in the Middle East. Iran obviously denying it, but the next move from the United States our key allies will be absolutely key.
Absolutely right. And I think there's a lot of talk about where this could go, whether the situation could be escalated. But I think the chatter is heading in the right direction, which is about de-escalation. So if there are going to be targeted sanctions against Iran, that's already happened through expelling certain diplomats and other measures there. But you can do that without arm-to-arm combat at this stage. But I think the US will be weighing up all of its options. Antony Blinken obviously gave a press conference in the United States yesterday to say that, there will be a response from the US, but it'll be at their time and it'll be in the way in which they think is the most appropriate. So all eyes are now on the United States as to when it makes that move.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, isn't it, how domestic politics plays so much into international politics. The States, they've got a presidential election this year. We've got a budget coming up. So all the noise, both sides. You've got Donald Trump saying, go a bit more hawkish, I suppose you could say, than President Biden. And here we've got all the generals. We've got the Secretary of State for Defence coming out saying, we need conscription, we need more cash. But a lot of that is part of the sort of national narratives rather than actually looking at what's happening in Iran, isn't it?
It is. I mean, it plays into, the very uncertain times that we're living. And you're absolutely right. There'll be supporters of Donald Trump who are clearly adversaries of Joe Biden to say we must act now. It's a demonstration of showing your strength. Opponents of Biden will say that the US looks weak if it doesn't take action now against Iran, who are clearly, as we know, funding these at arm's length organisations like Hezbollah in Tehran, like the Houthis who are carrying out the attacks in the Red Sea. So Iran is responsible.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, we've got lots of views coming in off the back of that debate we just had on no-go areas. Do they exist? Are they a problem in this country? Interestingly, Andy's got in touch. He says, Emily and Tom, I wonder if you might have ever considered there are some areas where a Muslim would feel unsafe to be walking, which is a very interesting point. And, of course, that may well be true, that if a Muslim went into an area in one of these countries, noticeably Muslim, they may well not feel safe.
It's interesting. It's almost the point that Emma Webb brought up about plural monoculturalism. Not multiculturalism, not sort of lots of different people living side by side in one big melting pot, but almost like a patchwork society, where you've got one culture and then a dividing line and then a different culture and then a dividing line and then a different culture. Plural monoculturalism. And I think that's a lot more of a concerning way to run a society than this big melting pot where everyone gets along together and there's some shared identity.
Yeah.
If we have all of these siloed little ghettoised communities, then no one gets along.
Yes, and there are far too many incidents of Muslim women in particular getting targeted when they're wearing the hijab, when they're covered, being shouted at in the streets and that sort of thing, particularly as well since everything that's been going on in the Middle East.
Yes, well, Anne has got in touch saying there's been no-go areas for years. And when I say years, I mean going back as far as the 1970s. They, being councils, governments, police, etc., always want to play it down. That's the problem. The agencies never dealt with it then, and they certainly aren't dealing with it now.
Yes, and David says there may not be a sign-up saying no-go area, but people in London know where not to go. And this is the thing, we're sort of mixing two things, because Paul Scully was talking about religious no-go areas, and he cited protests by Hizb ut-Tahrir, and he cited Muslim patrols, sort of vigilante groups in some areas of the country. And then there's also just talking about areas where you don't quite feel safe, where you wouldn't walk at night, where I, as a young woman, wouldn't want to walk, young-ish woman, wouldn't want to walk.
Very young, very young. But no, John agrees. He says you have to be blind to see these no-go areas in Birmingham, Leicester and Peterborough. Why are so many people afraid to say what is so blatantly obvious?
We'll keep your views coming in, gbviews@gbnews.com. You know the email. But shall we move on?
Yes, the Labour leader could face an investigation into claims that he broke House of Commons rules by putting pressure on the Speaker whilst under pressure before last week's vote on a ceasefire in Gaza.
Yes, the leader of the Commons, Penny Mordaunt, is said to believe that Sir Keir Starmer's push for Sir Lindsay Hoyle to break with precedent was a break with privilege. The Labour leader has hit back and has categorically denied threatening the Speaker, saying he simply urged him to ensure that we have the broadest possible debate. That's the line he is very much sticking to.
Well, let's cross to Westminster now and speak to our political correspondent, Catherine Forster. Because, Catherine, Penny Mordaunt, the leader of the Commons, is considering to put a motion before the House, we understand. And this could refer Sir Keir Starmer to the same committee that Boris Johnson was referred to.
Yes, it could, and it could potentially be extremely serious for Sir Keir Starmer. The Privileges Committee, cross-party, if it found that he had breached privilege, then very serious sanctions, including suspension. If it got to that point, I have to say that I very much doubt that it will. And I think it's worth remembering that everything that happens in Westminster this year, we've got to see it all through the lens of a looming general election. But let's just cast our minds back not even a week when Sir Keir Starmer looked like he was in a huge amount of trouble over the vote on the situation in Gaza. It looked like lots of his MPs might have voted with the SNP, might have defied him. It looked like the splits in the party would pour into the open. That would be very damaging indeed. Now, of course, none of that happened because, luckily for Labour, the Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, decided to break with precedent and select Labour's motion. Then the government pulled their motion. Labour's motion went through on the nod. It was a scene of utter and total chaos, and none of this was going to have any impact, bear in mind, of what actually happened in Gaza. So Labour were dug out of a very, very big hole by the Speaker, and subsequent to that, there's been a lot of accusations that Sir Keir Starmer or somebody else in Labour put undue pressure on Sir Keir Starmer to allow that Labour amendment through. Now, it was reported in the Sunday Times at the weekend that in the minutes immediately before the Speaker announced the amendments he'd chosen, Labour figures came out of a meeting with Lindsay Hoyle looking very, very glum indeed. Then minutes later, Sir Keir Starmer went into a private meeting, him, the Chief Labour Whip and Lindsay Hoyle. Moments after that, they came out looking very happy, and Sir Lindsay Hoyle announced that indeed they were going to have the Labour amendment after all. So we may never know what actually went on in that room or tipped the balance. Sir Lindsay Hoyle, of course, says his primary motivation was concern for the safety of MPs. Sir Keir Starmer denies that any threats or undue pressure was put upon him, but it certainly worked out very conveniently for Labour. And it might be now, the SNP are still very, very cross indeed, and the Conservatives potentially spy an opportunity to make a whole world of trouble for the Labour leader. But I'm not sure if they will go down that route. They've got enough problems of their own at the moment, possibly.
Well, Catherine, it is fascinating because we've now seen senior Labour MPs admit that they were, in effect, playing games, trying to delay the selection of this amendment, buy time with spurious points of order and the like. Chris Bryant admitted to such an instance live on television, actually, which was quite remarkable. So it does seem that there were some games going on. But yes, it will be fascinating to see if this does get referred onwards. Catherine Forster, thank you so much for the explanation.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, coming up, reports the Ministry of Defence will not have their funding increased in the upcoming budget, despite growing geopolitical tensions, despite the threat of war around the world. You're watching Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. We're the People's Channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, weekdays from 9 p.m.
Can, do you find the Union flag, the Union Jack, divisive?
In some situation, but as Simon quite clearly stated, and I agree with everything that he says in regards that there's situation when people use it for ulterior motive to cause fear, alarm and distress. We saw that with the far right when they came up to saying protecting the Churchill statues and things of that nature. But largely on the large whole, even I wave the St. George's flag on a sporting occasion. And I don't see anything wrong in raising the Union Jack or the St. George's flag so long as the intention is correct. And as he says, Mr. Brockhurst, he served for the country and he should have every right to be proud of what he's done and the way that he wants to display it.
All right, Simon, what do you make of this kind of, I would argue it as like student social media-based politics, where you get these pillocks from the Green Party or whatever saying, oh, it's divisive and I can't believe it. It will be legal in this country to do... Do those people need to get out more? I was on the streets of Stratford earlier on, an incredibly diverse place, speaking to a massive range of people right across different age demographics. I couldn't find a single sausage who said to me that they thought that this guy from the Green Party was right.
He obviously has absolutely no attention from anybody, and this is his way of finding attention. Both Ken and myself, we both agree that nobody should use any symbol of national identity to offend others deliberately, because that's just inflaming a situation. There's so much sensitivity around so many things today, and people do get offended by so much so quickly without any rhyme or reason.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
It's 1:50. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain. Now, reports suggest that the Ministry of Defence is not set to get any extra funding in next Wednesday's budget.
Yes, the Treasury is likely to argue that stretched public finances will limit the spending in the package unveiled next week by the Chancellor, despite stark warnings about the current state of our armed forces and growing geopolitical tensions.
Meanwhile, Slovakian Prime Minister Robert Fico has said EU and NATO countries are considering sending soldiers to Ukraine on a bilateral basis.
Well, we can speak now with the former British Army officer Hamish de Bretton-Gordon. And Hamish, let's start with this question. Is it seriously being considered that troops from NATO countries could enter into Ukraine?
Well, that's difficult to say, but it certainly should do. Absolutely. And, you know, the topic you're talking about here is UK, defence spending. We have never really, since the end of the Second World War, been closer to another war in Europe than we are at the moment. And if Russia prevails in Ukraine, absolutely, Europe will be at war with Russia. We need to prepare for that. But actually, when one looks at pure sort of military strategic thinking, if we have to fight the Russians, we want to fight them as far away as possible. And if the Russians can be stopped in Ukraine, that would be the best place to do it. And if it requires NATO troops, it requires NATO troops. I think what you're seeing in Europe today is they're looking at absolutely the worst case. And I think the other thing to say about this, some of the leaders are saying, oh, absolutely not, we're never going to go into Ukraine. Well, if Putin thinks that, the freedom of maneuver that gives him is extraordinary. So I'm sure it is not top of people's agenda, and sure it's not what we want to do. But yeah, we absolutely have to plan for it, because otherwise we could be fighting in France and in the Low Countries and even this country if Putin is not stopped in his tracks.
Well, Hamish, if it's true that they're considering sending troops over there to fight, then what on earth are the government thinking in not increasing defence spending?
Well, absolutely. 33 years ago today, I, with a lot of other young men and women, were fighting in Kuwait in tanks to repel the Iraqis who had illegally invaded Kuwait. Now, the army we had then is 3 times the size of the one we've got now. And, the thought of putting 200 tanks into the field in Ukraine is way beyond us. So I am pretty disappointed that none of the leading political parties, and they're all thinking about their own re-election or election later this year, are not really looking at the elephant in the room, which is potentially having to fight the Russians in Europe. And at the moment, if we can't afford a bit more money on that, quite frankly, everything else that the money's been will be spent on, everything else that's vexing us at the moment, from cost of living to climate change, could be irrelevant if we're all fighting the Russians next year. And the key with Putin is a tyrannical bully, and the only thing that he respects is strength. But, if you look at the British military and you look at other militaries around Europe, you can see, they are not showing a strong and united front. So, although nobody wants to spend any more money than they need to on defence, actually at the moment, and the fact we paid lip service to it since the end of the Cold War, we need to regain and produce a military that is, the right size and strength to protect this country, because at the moment we could be found wanting.
I'm reading here that we're spending about $68 billion, $68 billion a year on our military. It seems that this isn't perhaps getting the best value for money in terms of what we're procuring.
Well, I mean, that is a sort of different point. What are the balance of forces that you need? Certainly, we spent an awful lot of money on some very expensive aircraft carriers. We spend an awful lot of money on some very sophisticated jets. One of the things that is showing us about Ukraine, actually mass has a quality of its own. And, in my background, I was a tank commander for many years. Actually, it is the tanks that, 100 years after they're first used, are still, the key element on the battlefield. But we have sort of traded our
Hamish,
tanks
I'm
for
so sorry,
technology.
but we've come to the end of the hour. It's been great to speak to you, though. Hamish de Bretton-Gordon, former British Army officer. Sorry to cut him off there. But coming up, MPs warn that mass protests in London have put other police priorities at risk, costing us over £25 million so far just to police these protests. Stay with us.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GBNews.
Good afternoon, welcome to your latest GB News weather update with me, Annie, from the Met Office. Rain will continue to push southwards through the rest of the day, and that's because we do have a weather front sinking into northern areas of England and parts of Wales and the Midlands by this afternoon. That's going to be bringing that spell of cloudier and wetter weather. Behind it, though, it will turn much drier and clearer, but that drizzly rain will sink into parts of the southeast to end the day. It does turn clearer and drier behind that rain, but we also see a risk of some mist and fog and low cloud developing by the early hours. That is most likely across central and southern areas of England, but parts of Scotland as well as parts of southern Wales are likely to see some of that mist and fog to develop as well. So it will be a chilly start. Frost will be a little bit more limited than this morning, however, and there will be some sunshine first thing across eastern areas of England as well as eastern areas of Scotland, but quite quickly across the west it will turn wetter and cloudier, but as well as across northern areas. But the most persistent rain will push into parts of Wales and southwest England. For many of us, though, it will start to feel milder as the day moves on, as we get a more southerly wind direction develop. Another band of rain pushes southeastwards through Thursday, bringing some wet weather to more central and southeastern areas. Behind it, though, it will turn more unsettled, so there's a risk of showers for the rest of the week for most areas, but temperatures will also dip down much closer or a little bit below average to end the week.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
You have a president in President Biden who's not enforcing the law that was passed by Congress. President Obama, criticize him or not, actually enforced the law and was deporting people that had crossed illegally. Of course, President Trump enforced the law and improved the law to make sure that and worked with Mexico to have the Remain in Mexico policy. Biden has abandoned federal policy. In fact, he's deliberately trying to let in as many immigrants as possible. More for the Democrats, more is better and less is racist.
Just astonishing. And the statement that Greg Abbott put out is really feisty stuff. He said the federal government has broken the contract between the United States and the state of Texas. And the eye numbers, Greg, are simply eye-watering. 6 million illegal immigrants have crossed our southern border in just 3 years, Governor Abbott says. That's more than the population of 33 states the United States. Astonishing numbers.
And Martin, that's just Texas. If you add Arizona and other border states, you know, it's pushing 10 million. By the end of Biden's term, it'll be 11 million. A study by Yale University a few weeks ago, 3 very liberal professors that did the study estimate there's 22 million illegal aliens. So this is a crisis that was created by Biden. It's what he wants. They want unfettered access to the border. They're letting them in. It's a real hardship on the working people of Texas and other border states. And now it's a real hardship on cities that the federal government, as well as the governors of Texas and other states, are sending some of the migrants to those so-called sanctuary cities.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Tuesday, the 27th of February.
The Lee Addison row, Home Secretary James Cleverly has urged him to apologise for his comments, and the Lib Dems have waded in, calling for a formal parliamentary disapproval. Addison, meanwhile, has refused to rule out defecting to the Reform Party.
Police under pressure. Palestine marches are costing the taxpayer tens of millions of pounds and putting neighbourhood policing at risk. That's according to a group of MPs who want protest organisers to give a longer notice period.
And Donald Trump says Prince Harry betrayed Queen Elizabeth and treated her with disrespect. The former president says he wouldn't protect the Duke of Sussex if he regains the presidency. What does that mean?
Well, Lee Anderson, this row is now in its 5th day, and it seems that it's not quietening down. It's interesting that the Home Secretary, speaking from New York, has asked him to apologise.
Yes, I guess they can't say no comment when asked, can they? And then they get drawn into this line of questioning, and they don't want to say what he said was Islamophobic. They don't want to say it was prejudice.
I'm actually quite...
And then they get stuck in this sort of vortex, don't they?
I'm pretty fed up of everyone using the word Islamophobic. I think I'm going to make a real
conscious
effort to stop saying it myself, because it's such a nebulous term. What does it mean? Does it mean critical of the idea of Islam, or does it mean being bigoted toward Muslim people? Because ultimately, if we want to talk about people and respect towards people, we should use the term anti-Muslim bigotry. Islamophobia could be attributed to ideas. We had this debate yesterday, and I think it's really important to perhaps steer away from using the word Islamophobia.
Yes, lots of people have said anti-Muslim hatred would be a better term, because then it's not about criticism of a religion per se, but of individuals.
And it's perfectly okay to criticise a religion or a philosophy or a set of ideas. We should allow that. We should even encourage that in society.
Well, you're an atheist, aren't you?
Well... well, we should also be critical of
any religion, any ideology, any belief system.
We should be critical of veganism. You're allowed to be critical of free market ideologues and communists. You're allowed to... These are all ideas.
Well,
critical of ideas is good.
Lee Anderson was talking about Islamophobia as a term last night, actually, on Patrick Christie's Tonight, when he did that sit-down interview. He was getting going around that a little bit. But let us know what you make of it all. GBviews at GBnews.com. The Lib Dems getting involved as well, trying to get him censured. But let's get your...
with a motion that doesn't really mean anything. But anyway, it's your headlines with Sophia.
Thanks, Tom. Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 2. I'm Sophia Wenslet in the GB newsroom. Ministers are refusing to call a suspended Tory MP's comments Islamophobic. The Prime Minister has reiterated his views, saying Lee Anderson's remarks about the London mayor were wrong because they conflated all Muslims with Islamist extremism. But he doesn't believe he's a racist. The former deputy chair is refusing to apologise and maintains Sadiq Khan has lost control of London to a tiny minority of extremists. Mr Anderson says he's simply trying to highlight what he believes is the mayor's failure to tackle pro-Palestine protests. And the Conservative Party is facing more backlash after MP Paul Scully claimed there were no-go areas in Birmingham and East London. The former minister made reference to areas with large Muslim communities, which he says he now regrets. West Midlands Mayor Andy Street responded by saying Westminster needs to stop the nonsense slurs. Meanwhile, MPs are warning protests are putting unsustainable pressure on police resources. They're calling on the government to give more support as demonstrations continue over the Israel-Gaza war. A cross-party committee found that policing protests between the 7th of October and the 17th of December last year cost forces more than £25 million. Former Scotland Yard detective Peter Blexley says the marches are having a massive impact on resources.
And the committee has said that organisers of these protests probably should be forced into giving more notice of them, because literally they're telling the Met within days that there's going to be 100,000 or more people on the streets of London. And of course, that's putting huge pressure on the police and their resources.
In other news, there's been no breakthrough on negotiations for a Gaza ceasefire, but Qatar says it remains optimistic. It's after a proposal to swap Israeli hostages for Palestinian prisoners was sent to Hamas. Several days of multinational talks have been held in Paris discussing the possibility of a temporary truce. Reports suggest the deal would see all Israeli women, children under 19, elderly and sick hostages released in exchange for a number of Palestinian prisoners. The BBC has apologised to the family embroiled in the Huw Edwards scandal over the way their complaint was handled. It follows claims a news presenter paid for explicit photos of a teenager. A review into how non-editorial complaints are handled identified a number of failures and says there's a need for greater consistency when it comes to addressing concerns. The report found the initial complaint about Edwards was not logged on the relevant case management system, so could not be seen by senior figures. An 18th century pub that was destroyed in a suspected arson attack in the West Midlands is set to be rebuilt. The Crooked House was demolished 2 days after the fire last August. An enforcement notice has now been issued against the owners for its unlawful demolition, and local authorities are ordering it to be rebuilt back to its original state. Underwater experts who supported the search for Nicola Bulley are joining the operation to find a toddler in Leicester. 2-year-old Zylo Marutsiva fell into the River Soar 9 days ago while out with his family. Police say the search area is being widened, with teams checking various points along the river. The Home Secretary will call on the international community to take collective action on migration. In a major speech in New York, James Cleverly will urge countries to work together to address root causes and to smash people smuggling gangs. He'll also say that doing the right thing by migrants doesn't necessarily mean relocating them to the UK. And the Prince of Wales has been forced to pull out of an event due to a personal matter. Queen Camilla led the royal family and attended a memorial service for King Constantine of Greece. Prince William was due to deliver a reading at the service for the monarch, who was his godfather. Kensington Palace didn't elaborate, but confirmed the Princess of Wales, who's recovering from abdominal surgery, is doing well. The King also missed the service as he continues treatment for cancer. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Tom and Emily.
Well, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, regards Lee Anderson's comments as wrong because they conflate all Muslims with Islamist extremism. That's what Downing Street has said.
But the Prime Minister's official spokesperson emphasised that Rishi Sunak does not believe that Lee Anderson himself is a racist.
OK, well, this comes as senior Conservatives face mounting pressures to describe Mr Anderson's remarks as Islamophobic. Labour has labelled the Tories' reluctance to refer to Islamophobia as weak.
But let's talk to our GB News political correspondent, Olivia Utley, who joins us now live from Westminster. And Olivia, this is a fascinating distinction between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. The Labour Party has adopted this very broad-ranging definition of Islamophobia, but the Tories have not, and they prefer the term anti-Muslim bigotry.
Yes, Tom, and I think that gets really to the crux of why this row over Lee Anderson has caught the attention and imagination of Parliament to such an extent. Essentially, what it's done is expose a huge schism in the Conservative Party. On the left of the Conservative Party, the more moderate wing of the party, they call themselves the One Nationers, are a group of MPs who believe, in short, I mean, this is a broad brush strokes I'm going with here, but essentially believe that the threat of Islamist extremism is overstated by some on the right of their party, and that a serious concern in the UK at the moment is a surge of Islamophobia. What they're worried about is heightening community tensions as a result of these pro-Palestine protests and possibly some sort of Islamophobic backlash. They're worried, in short, about the rise of far-right terror in response to these pro-Palestinian protests. On the other side of the party, the opposite wing of the party, the right of the party, there are a group of MPs who are very, very worried about the threat of Islamist terror. And they believe, Suella Braverman is among their leaders, that the Islamophobia calls are actually hysterical. That's the word that the former Home Secretary used this morning. Those are two deeply opposing views. And what Rishi Sunak is trying to do at the moment is to tread a very thin tightrope between the two. He can't afford to lose either wing of his party. If you cast your minds back quickly to the Rwanda vote, the last parliamentary term, he had to try really, really hard to keep those two sides of the Conservative Party on side. That's what he's trying to do here again. But that's left him in a bit of a corner. He has to say that he believes that Lee Anderson's comments were wrong to appease those on the left of his party, but he doesn't want to go as far as to say that they were Islamophobic, because he doesn't want to annoy those on the right of his party. He's come up with this phrase, anti-Muslim hatred, and as you say, Tom, this might well be a more appropriate phrase than Islamophobia, because obviously in a free country we have the right to criticise any religion. Anti-Muslim hatred is something different, and Rishi Sunak is going to try and stand by this line that what Lee Anderson said wasn't Islamophobic, but it might have been anti-Muslim, and that's why he should apologise. The problem is that that's a pretty precarious position to be in, and the more that this row plays out, the more questions are asked of him, and we can expect a lot more in PMQs tomorrow, the more difficult this very technical definition comes to maintain. And actually earlier, one of Rishi Sunak's ministers, Michael Tomlinson, the immigration minister, was asked 6 times whether what Lee Anderson said was Islamophobic, and he couldn't come up with an answer. And to me, I think that's sort of foreshadowing of the days and possibly weeks ahead with this row. There is a serious division in the Conservative Party, and Rishi Sunak is walking a very thin tightrope between the two sides of his party.
It's interesting you say that. I was going to ask, you've reported on many scandals that have been based on comments, remarks made by politicians that others deem controversial and have caused a lot of offence. Do you think this particular one will continue to rumble and rumble and rumble on? What's your feeling?
I think it might well continue to rumble on, partly because of the sort of character of Lee Anderson. He was a hugely popular MP in the Conservative Party. He was made vice chairman of the Conservative Party because it was believed that he was someone who was able to speak to the Red Wall, that huge constituent of the country who lent their votes to Boris Johnson in 2019. He's supposed to be a sort of voice for the ordinary people. And indeed, there was a backlash in the Red Wall when he was stripped of the Conservative whip. So Lee Anderson's character makes this a problem for the Prime Minister. But also, I think what this row represents is a problem for the Prime Minister. That's what makes me think this will really rumble on. It has shone a light on a quite serious division within the Conservative Party over what the definition of Islamophobia actually is.
Really important points there, Olivia Utley. Thank you so much for bringing them to us live from Westminster. And Emily, I've been reading this definition of Islamophobia, the one that was put up by the APPG on Islamophobia, the one that the Labour Party has adopted. They said that they would bring to the country. And there's some
blasphemy law, isn't it?
There's some really concerning stuff in here. It says that accusing Muslims as a group or Muslim-majority states of inventing or exaggerating Islamophobia, ethnic cleansing or genocide perpetrated against Muslims, accusing anyone of saying that that's an exaggeration would itself be Islamophobic. Which means that if you were to say, hang on, if for example, the Palestinian Liberation Organization said that there's a genocide in Gaza, and you said, hang on, there might not be, shall we try this out in a legal court? Well, one side would be, by this definition, automatically Islamophobic. And there's another line in this definition which says that claims of Muslims spreading Islam by the sword or subjugating minority groups under their rule would be considered Islamophobic. But anyone who knows their history knows that's precisely what Muslim states did. They spread Islam by the sword, just as Christian states spread Christianity by the sword.
Isn't there something nebulous about Muslimness? Or showing Muslimness or something like this? It's very nebulous. It's very vague. I'm personally glad that the government didn't adopt this definition of Islamophobia, but I do imagine the Labour Party will if they get into government.
It's just got huge holes in it. I don't see how you could run a society, and particularly conflicts like the Arab-Israeli conflict, where one side is automatically Islamophobic if they disagree with what a Muslim-majority state says.
Yeah, I think people should read that definition, actually, and see if they agree with it. But should we move on? Because protest organisers may have to give the police more notice of demonstrations. The Home Office has been encouraged to require protest groups to inform the authorities earlier due to the frequency and scale of demonstrations over the Middle East conflict. Now, I believe that they're supposed to give 6 days notice, but apparently that's not enough because people are very much leaving it to just 6 days.
Well, a Home Affairs Committee report found that these disruptive tactics of some groups are causing unsustainable pressure on police resources.
Yes, protests between October and December last year cost police forces across the country more than £25 million.
Well, the former Met police officer Chris Hobbs joins us now. And Chris, people will think that £25 million is a staggering sum of money. What is this sort of money being spent on specifically?
Well, I mean, there's a huge question of police resources, and a lot of it is overtime. For some big protests that we've had, you've had to bring in officers from other forces just to make sure that policing in London overall can continue. So it is a huge drain on resources. When you bring officers down from other forces, you don't just bring them down, you also have to accommodate them. You can't expect them to drive overnight, say, from the northeast. And then expect them to perform duty for 12 hours. So all in all, the costs mount up, overtime, cancelled rest days, and yeah, it's a big expense, but people will argue that's the price you pay for democracy and the freedom to protest.
Yeah, Chris, because presumably Met police officers are used to policing demonstrations, but police officers from other areas of the country may not be as well trained for this type of policing, or does everyone know how to do it?
No, I do go out on these protests, not to protest, but just to observe, because I prefer to see things for myself rather than rely on others. And certainly people from other forces, officers from other forces, really do know their stuff. They're highly trained in public order. If there's a problem, they're as capable of dealing with it as their Metropolitan Police colleagues. So I don't think we lose anything. In fact, in some respects, we gain, because some of these public order serials, as we call them, groups of officers, now are level ones. So they are very highly trained to deal with almost any situation. And they're also quite restrained. In other words, they're not aggressive. They will get on reasonably well with the marchers from whichever side they come from, providing those marchers obey the law. So it's necessary at the moment if you're going to sustain a reasonable level of policing in London. Having said that, at the last protest, which I witnessed, the general estimate for numbers was somewhere between 20 and 30,000, as opposed to the huge numbers that we saw early on. So perhaps they won't be needed so much in the near future. I think there's another march coming up on March the 9th. So we'll see what the Met bosses decide to do there. But numbers have certainly decreased, as you would expect, as the months have gone on.
It is fascinating, though, to see so many of these marches leaving it, as Emily says, to the last possible moment to declare it. Presumably, that makes things more expensive. Last-minute hotel rooms are far more expensive than ones that can be booked longer in advance. Is there some extent some of these organisers of marches sort of deliberately causing as much obstruction and difficulty for the policing operation as they can?
Yeah, I can't hear you quite clearly, but I think I've got the general gist of it. By and large, the shorter the notice, the more expensive it is to police, because if officers are have their rest days cancelled at short notice, that costs a lot more money in wages. So the longer the notice, the better it is for police or for the Met and other police forces to cope with it. Having said that, you will run into a problem where, for example, you may have something very dramatic happens on the world stage, where there's mass loss of life. It could be Ukraine, it could be somewhere else, and people want to get out on the streets and protest. So if they have to give, say, 10 days notice as opposed to 6, you're going to have problems enforcing that, because you could get tens of thousands out on the streets to protest against something diabolical that has just happened on the world stage. So it's possibly not always going to be easy to enforce. And then, of course, where you've got people talk about banning these demonstrations, don't they? For one reason or another. But if all of a sudden you get 30,000 people out on the streets, what are you going to do with them? And with these Palestinian protests, it staggers me the number of babies in prams, toddlers in pushchairs, children who are on the protests. And of course, if police forcibly then had to end the protest, which would inevitably lead to violence, what are people going to say if you've got children who are injured or sobbing and all the rest of it? So very, very difficult all round for police. And by and large, I think the MPs, I speed read the report, I think the MPs seem fairly satisfied with the way the Met have handled it, despite these allegations that we've heard of two-tier policing. By and large, the MPs seem seem okay with it.
That's an accusation that's often levelled at the Met Police when it comes to policing protests. But you say lots of MPs, most MPs are happy enough with the way that they've been policed. Thank you very much for your time. Chris Hobbs, former Met Police officer. Great to get your experience and knowledge on this one. I mean, for me, it is concerning that perhaps resources are being taken away from where they could be used, you know, for more important matters,
Well,
perhaps.
yeah, I mean, it's quite frankly shocking that if there's a part of the country that has a police force at a certain size, that'll be depleted just because there's a large march in London. Well, what if the rest of the country needs to be policed? That's a big concern.
Yes, and lots of people would say, why on earth did the police not do anything when chants were being projected onto Big Ben?
Well, coming up, the Home Secretary James Cleverly is in the United States, setting out his vision for global migration. But how will it impact us here in Britain? You're watching Good Afternoon Britain here on GB News.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show. Sunday mornings from 9:30.
We had Grant Shapps on last week. He was talking about how defence spending is now creeping up to 2.25% of GDP. Ben Wallace's predecessor suggested it should be 3%. We hear that we've got the smallest army, I think, since the Napoleonic Wars. Numbers are down. There's a question as to whether we can staff frigates in the Red Sea. Why haven't we sent aircraft carriers? What's your impression of the situation?
Well, I don't think it matters how much you spend, it's how effectively you spend it. And we spend it very ineffectively. We have lots of scandals about defence spending. And I think partly because of the monopoly position of some of our defence suppliers, we don't get good value and we don't get reliability. This latest story in the Telegraph is that HMS Diamond, which is our ship, which is out there defending the Red Sea, doesn't have the capability of firing a missile from the ship to the land, so it can't participate in the attacks on the Houthis. So in order that we can participate in the attacks, we're flying RAF aircraft from Cyprus, which is a very long way away. When I was Defence Secretary, I ordered cruise missiles for our nuclear-powered, but not nuclear-armed submarines. And I think we have 6 or possibly 7 of those. But last autumn, it was reported that 5 of those were out of commission, were not available. We have about 21 aggressive surface ships. So we've got 2 aircraft carriers, then we've got frigates, and we've got destroyers. But at any one time, you can count on about half of those not being available because they're under refit or whatever. So we have a minimal surface fleet now. And for whatever reason, it doesn't seem that we're able to deploy a submarine to the area that can fire cruise missiles. Our 2 aircraft carriers, built at enormous expense, are sitting in Portsmouth.
Which seems to most people ludicrous,
well,
at least with what's going on.
It doesn't seem ludicrous to me.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 24 minutes past 2, and the Home Secretary is leading an international push to address global migration in a major speech today.
Yes, during a 2-day visit to New York, James Cleverly will outline how tackling global migration can only be met with international action to reform migration policy worldwide.
Well, joining us now to discuss this is GB News Home and Security Editor Mark White. And Mark, I suppose one of the big issues that's holding back many national governments around the world from addressing international movement of people are all these old treaties that all of these countries signed up to in the wake of the Second World War.
I think you're right there. I think that's a big issue, and one that in his speech he will touch on. There is discussion internationally, of course, about just how fit for purpose these treaties are, many of which were drawn up, of course, in a completely different era where you're not looking at the mass migration of individuals across the globe, with estimates saying that more than 1 billion people in the next few years will likely be on the move for a range of issues, from the climate to famine to wars to lack of opportunities in their own countries. And yes, those treaties, James Cleverly will argue, really need to be looked at again and perhaps be redrawn to take account of what we are now witnessing. He says really that the international community needs to treat the migration crisis in the same way that the international community has been treating the likes of the climate crisis, coming together very effectively on that particular issue. The same kind of resolve is required really to make an effective difference as far as the growing migration crisis is concerned.
We're just hearing that James Cleverly is stuck in traffic, so he's running a little bit late for the event. I want to ask you about something in France. Now, an imam made some inflammatory remarks recently in France about the flag, the French flag, being satanic, I believe his words were. He was arrested and then 12 hours later was deported from the country back to his home country. Now, the French have been able to do that very quickly. Is that because they've introduced stricter laws than we have in this country? How come the French are able to do that, but we struggle sometimes with the deportations?
Well, I think the likelihood is that they probably have very similar laws to the UK in terms of criminal offences and their ability, of course, to deport foreign national offenders or anyone else that might be deemed not to be conducive to the public good and potentially a threat to public safety. We have these laws, but we've seen in the past, of course, issues dragging on for years. I remember covering for more than a decade the fight to get rid of the Islamist extremism Abu Qatada before he was eventually kicked out of the country and returned to Jordan. And we've had the same issues. OK, this was a legal issue in terms of criminality, but Abu Hamza, another one that dragged on in the courts. And perhaps we're seeing a situation where politicians have the resolve in France that they've decided to take a more no-nonsense approach and to be more forthright in their decisions to get those people out of the country. Will it happen in the UK? Well, I don't know.
No, really interesting stuff there. Mark White, thank you very much for bringing it to us here on Good Afternoon Britain. Appreciate your time.
Now, this all comes as Portland Mayor Carolyn Parks is bringing a judicial review against Dorset Council, challenging the local authority over having no planning authority to house asylum seekers on the Bibby Stockholm barge.
Well, joining us now from the Royal Courts of Justice is GB News reporter Ray Addison. And Ray, what is this appeal all about and might it be successful?
Well, this is really Carolyn Parks' last roll of the dice here at the Crown Court. A previous attempt to bring a case against the Home Office was refused by the judge in that case. And in fact, he suggested that actually Miss Parks should bring the case against the local authority. Now, of course, Miss Parks, as well as being the mayor of Portland in Dorset, is also a local councillor. She said she was extremely reluctant to make that decision, but I guess she believes she had no other option. So this case is really going to be what's described as a rolled-up hearing today. So firstly, the judge will have to decide if Ms Parks can have permission to proceed to a full judicial review. If permission is not granted, then it's over, everybody goes home. If the judge decides that the full judicial review is allowed, then we move into this, what is expected to be a 3-day hearing. Now, the key point of contention is the extent of local authority power. Ms Parks believes that Dorset Council does have the jurisdiction to enforce planning authority over the barge. Dorset Council says, no, we don't. The barge is on Crown land, and therefore the jurisdiction goes to the Home Office. Now, in her claim, Miss Parks is arguing that the Bibby Stockholm is actually engineless. She says it's permanently moored in Portland Harbour, and therefore it should be treated in the same manner that a local council might treat a pier, although it's obviously over water. It is a permanent fixture and therefore comes under their jurisdiction. Now, if that argument fails, she's going to argue that Dorset Council has jurisdiction over the access road to the barge and also to what they're calling the finger pier, which is the route that we've seen those asylum seekers take when they're dropped off. They walk along the finger pier and then up the gantry into the barge. And she's saying at least you should have jurisdiction action over that, and obviously you can put controls and measures in place. Now, alongside these technical arguments, Ms Parks is also arguing very strongly that the barge is expensive. She says it's dangerous. She's citing obviously the tragic suicide which took place in December, where one man on the barge took his own life. She says it's been a disastrous plan, and she argues that if men continue to be housed on that barge, and of course it houses up to around 500 or so men, multiple people in one room, and there's been much concern over their access within that barge and the resources that are available to them. She says that this will lead to potentially further disasters. She wants that barge to be moored back out, towed back out to sea.
Thank you very much indeed, Ray. I hope that construction noise wasn't too painful for your ears. You were battling against it there, but we heard everything well and clear. Thank you very much for your time.
Now, James cleverly has beat the traffic and started speaking in New York. This is where he is talking at the Carnegie Council about his ideas of reforming the global migration system. He's outlining a new migration vision during this visit, calling on the global community to take collective action on migration at this speech. He's trying to lead an international push to tackle issues around global migration. This is what the Home Office are saying.
Not sure what I was imagining there, but that room isn't particularly impressive, is it?
No,
it's like a cupboard.
It's not sort of a grand, big speech with lots of dignitaries there, but this is the Carnegie Council for Ethics in International Affairs, and the Home Secretary's speech that he's hoping will start some sort of international movement.
Yes, and we'll bring you any highlights, of course we will. But coming up, has Prince Harry been trumped? This comes as the former president says Prince Harry betrayed Queen Elizabeth and treated her with disrespect. That's after your headlines with Sophia.
Thanks, Emily. It's 2:33. I'm Sophia Wenslet in the GB newsroom. Ministers are refusing to call a suspended Tory MP's comments Islamophobic. The Prime Minister says Lee Anderson's comments were wrong because they conflated all Muslims with Islamist extremism. But Rishi Sunak doesn't believe he's racist. The former Deputy Chair is refusing to apologise for criticising the London Mayor and maintains Sadiq Khan has lost control of London to a tiny minority of extremists. And the Conservative Party is facing more backlash after MP Paul Scully claimed there are no-go areas in Birmingham and East London. The former minister made reference to areas with large Muslim communities, which he says he now regrets. West Midlands Mayor Andy Street responded by saying Westminster needs to stop the nonsense slurs. The BBC has apologised to the family embroiled in the Huw Edwards scandal over the way their complaint was handled. It follows claims the news presenter paid for explicit photos of a teenager. A review into how non-editorial complaints are handled identified a number of failures and says there's a need for greater consistency when it comes to addressing concerns. Queen Camilla has attended a memorial service for King Constantine of Greece. The Prince of Wales, who was due to deliver a reading at the service, was forced to pull out due to a personal matter. Kensington Palace didn't elaborate, but confirmed the Princess of Wales, who's recovering from abdominal surgery, is doing well. The King also missed the service as he continues treatment for cancer. The Crooked House pub, which was destroyed in a suspected arson attack in the West Midlands, is set to be rebuilt. Locals were outraged when it was demolished just 2 days after the fire last August. An enforcement notice has now been issued against the owners for its unlawful demolition, with authorities ordering it to be restored to its original state within 3 years. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World. Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones, who's the clinical lead for Care After Combat.
Yep.
Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity, who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system and...
So there's quite a high population of ex-servicemen and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. Yeah. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, you know, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr Jane, and I guess for some people, you know, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain, 38 minutes past 2, and you have all been getting in touch on Islamophobia. This row, this definition, 5 days now of conversation about the former Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party, Lee Anderson, and his views.
Yes, indeed. Sienna says, how can it be that there is so much negativity instead of positive, productive discussion around someone with a backbone saying what a heck of a lot of us think? So Sienna certainly agrees with Lee Anderson.
Yeah, and Clive does too. He says it's neither Islamophobic nor anti-Muslim to express the perception that Islamists have taken over our streets. When ordinary people have to fear, distress and alarm at visiting areas in our cities, then it's very real. And Clive, I think you've got a fair point there about perceptions and about perhaps not standing up to certain extreme groups. But the problem is Lee Anderson didn't say that. He said that Sadiq Khan and Keir Starmer had been controlled by Islamists, which is, even he admits, is clumsy phrasing. Perhaps it would help if he said sorry for the phrasing and expressed it how he meant to say it originally.
Yes, probably. Probably. Linda says, well done, Lee Anderson, for sticking to his and most of the general public's views. In her view, wish there were more MPs like him, straight-talking, saying what they believe in and not backing down. Yes, this is the thing, that whether you agree or disagree with Lee Anderson, is it refreshing that he actually stuck to what he said? Didn't say sorry, or do we like to hear our politicians apologise for
Did he stick to what he said, though?
Well, he didn't apologise.
He refused to apologise, but he did say, I used sloppy language, I shouldn't have used that language.
That is true.
Using the word controlled was obviously idiotic. I think he would agree with that.
And, of course, he said Keir Starmer's also controlled by Islamists, but there you go.
Yeah, let's get to another one. Robert said Khan has a habit of addressing any criticism by immediately claiming racism or phobia or extremism, thus moving away from the issue raised. And, Robert, I think it's tricky because there's obviously been a displacement activity. We're talking about Lee Anderson when we should all be talking about the fact that Parliament's rules were changed due to a threat of extremism. That's a far bigger issue. But again, to what extent is Lee Anderson himself to blame for this? Because he used such a stupid phrase in clumsily getting across a point that might have some merit.
And a hell of a lot of people agree that what Lee Anderson, or they think that what Lee Anderson said was Islamophobic. So Sadiq Khan says that too, so there you go. But joining us now from Westminster is GB News political editor Christopher Hope. Christopher, thank you very much indeed. You've heard some of the views coming into our inbox here. Lots of people saying Lee Anderson's right to stick... Oh, we've had a phone call. That Lee Anderson is right to stick to what he said and that he shouldn't cow down to pressure and that sort of thing. But where does he actually stand when it comes to what's all been going on?
That's right, Tom. That's right, Emily. Well, all eyes on the House of Commons today. There are votes in the House of Commons. Which way will Lee Anderson vote? Of course, he says last night to GB News he'll vote with the government, but will he try and cross the floor, in fact? We've heard from number 10 this lunchtime about what actually he did wrong, because until now there's been problems with other ministers. They can't say what Lee Anderson actually did wrong when he made his remarks about controlled by Islamists, and of course that was denied by Sadiq Khan. Well, number 10 now say that the issue they have with this individual, they say, rather than naming him, was that he conflated all Muslims with Islamist extremism. So the idea of branding all Muslims as Islamists, which I don't think Lee Anderson was doing. In fact, he said he wasn't doing in a statement to us yesterday. But that's why he lost the whip originally. So that may offer a way back for Lee Anderson, because now they've said what the problem is. It's something which Lee Anderson can deal with. What he won't do, as you said there, Tom, very eloquently, is he won't say sorry in terms. He will regret clumsy language, but no more than that. And so this takes on a day 6 frame. We may see more news on him tomorrow. I do think, though, he is definitely weighing up whether he should go and join the Reform UK party from his remarks to Patrick Critters and me last night.
No, that is a really significant issue because, of course, Richard Tice has been making overtures towards Lee Anderson. He hasn't ruled it out. But also we hear today that Richard Tice has been saying that 2 unnamed Conservative members of Parliament have tried to join Reform, and he said no. I find it really hard to believe that. Why would Richard Tice say no to 2 potential defectees?
I think he's that desperate, do you?
Today's Westminster parlour game is working out which MPs would turn down, roles with, who would Richard Tice turn down to join their party. It's hard to think of anyone they wouldn't rather have than nobody, because it gives them a position, a chance to debate issues in Parliament and with their banner. I mean, that's why you do it. Of course, the last Tory MP to leave to join a minor party was Andrew Bridgen, who joined Reclaim briefly. That's the kind of free speech party. Then he's now independent after falling out with them. So that's that. We're not sure who that is, and it seems unusual that he would say that, but I'll try and find out for you both.
Yes, that would be very interesting to know.
I can think of a few names.
Who would Richard Tice turn down?
I can think of a few names who were elected as Conservative MPs, but are now no longer Conservative MPs. And there are quite a few people who sit in on varying degrees of disgrace.
Yes, actually, now I can think of a couple.
Yeah.
I would say.
Well, I don't know if it's opportune to say that. Perhaps we shouldn't. Perhaps we'll have to come back to you, Christopher Hope, after we've checked with some lawyers about which names we're allowed to talk about and which we're not.
Yes, it might be some disgraced MPs that Richard Tice says he doesn't particularly fancy having on his team.
Well, Christopher Hope, thank you very much for joining us. Sorry, yes?
Well, I should say, if Lee Anderson does swap sides back to Reform UK, it would be a complete disaster for the PM. I mean, he is seen as someone once said, the red wall made flesh, and where he defined that it doesn't suit him, or he's hasn't got the right accent or the right person for the Tory party, it would set the party back a long way in terms of winning back and holding on to these red wall seats in the forthcoming election.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your time, Christopher Hope, our GB News political editor, of course.
Well, coming up, J.K. Rowling criticises Sky News for referring to a cat killer as a woman. This, of course, was a transgender woman talking...
She took to social media. J.K. Rowling took to social media saying she's sick of men being labelled as females when they've committed a crime. So we'll get to the root of this. I have some thoughts.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World, Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones, who's the clinical lead for Care After Combat.
Yep.
Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity, who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system and...
So there's quite a high population of ex-servicemen and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. Yeah. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr. Jane, and I guess for some people, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Just coming up to 10 to 3, and Donald Trump has said that Prince Harry will be on his own if he returns to the presidency, following what he believes to be unforgivable disloyalty to the Queen.
Yes, the former president said that Joe Biden's administration had been too gracious to the Duke of Sussex since he moved to America with his wife Meghan Markle in 2020.
Well, we're joined now by the former royal correspondent at The Sun, Charles Ray. And Charles, this all relates to, I suppose, Harry's immigration status and a row over what he did or did not declare on his immigration documents.
Absolutely. We know from a court case that was last Friday because the Conservative think tank wanted to make Harry's application public. What did he say on that application where you asked the question, have you ever taken drugs? Did he answer yes? Did he answer no? Who knows? It was kept secret. Now, then, of course, the think tank said, well, hang on a minute. He's written this book, Spare. He's been on magic mushroom. He's been on heroin. He's been on marijuana.
Well, not heroin, Charles.
Sorry, cocaine. Apologies, wrong drug.
Quite a different.
He has. Sorry, apologies for that. Yes, cocaine. So the Biden administration have said, well, that's not actually proof that he's taking drugs. They're suggesting that he may have said he was taking those drugs to sensationalise his book, as if it wasn't sensationalised enough. But we have to remember that in this country, we know that he has taken drugs because there has been reports of it and admissions about it in this country.
Yes, so Charles, Donald Trump, he's never thought that much of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Well, ever since Megxit, what some people coined it when they moved to California and moved to the States. So he's going to take a bit of a tough line. I mean, what does that actually mean? Donald Trump's not going to do anything. He's not going to banish them, is he?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's Donald Trump and his rhetoric again. And also, let's not forget, Meghan was the one who said, I'm never going to live in America with a Donald Trump as president. And what does she do? She goes to live in America. So there is a lot of, animosity between the two. I think Donald Trump is playing to the crowds, and I suspect that if he does become president, he's got a few much more important things to sort out first of all than whether Prince Harry's status should stay in America or where he should come back to the UK. I hope he doesn't come back to the UK, but that's just me, because I think too much has happened under the bridge so far. He's done so much wrong. I want him to stay in America. America what's there, they can have him.
Well, Charles Ray, former royal correspondent at The Sun, thank you very much for your thoughts on this issue.
I always get told off for saying I'd love to see him back here. But I do, that is my view. But anyway, to finish the show, J.K. Rowling has sparked a new trans row as she criticised the media for failing to make clear that a murderer was transgender rather than a woman.
Well, Sky News' tweet read, a woman who filmed herself killing a cat before putting the animal in a blender has been jailed for life for murdering a man 4 months later.
So as you can see, Sky News decided to call the perpetrator of a hideous murder a woman. And J.K. Rowling has said, I'm so sick of this beep. This is not a woman. These are not our crimes. Now, she's clarified what she had to say. She said, crime statistics are rendered useless if violent and sexual attacks committed by men are recorded as female crimes. Activists are already clamouring for this sadistic killer to be incarcerated in a woman's prison. Now, she's not going to be incarcerated in a woman's prison.
She's going to go to a man's prison. This is about how a tweet wrote it. I think the article said... No.
We see this so much. We see this so much. The Guardian didn't mention that it was a transgender woman till the 5th paragraph or something like this. We've seen a Guardian columnist actually write a public letter to the Guardian complaining about this. We can't just go around pretending...
Yeah, but I don't think any of these articles did. As you said,
they did. Sky News has said a woman.
Should have done it earlier.
A woman, and it's a biological male.
But this is the Sky News in an early paragraph said it was a trans woman. I mean,
so you see no problem with that? You don't think accuracy is important?
I think they probably should have said trans woman in the headline. But I see a big problem actually with what J.K. Rowling said when she said hashtag not our crimes. We don't have collective punishment in this country. What does she mean not our crimes?
No, I'm sorry, but when it comes to violent assault like this and murder, these are types far more likely to be male crimes. If you then put it down as a female crime, you're distorting.
Responsible for every crime that a man
You're
does?
You're distorting the statistics if you put that down as a female crime.
Not our crimes. What does that mean?
You're absolutely wrong on this. J.K. Rowling is right on this. She's saying that essentially this is misinformation. It's ideologically driven, and Sky News have done the wrong thing here by calling this perpetrator of this crime female.
We can do two things here. We can say that Sky News were remiss in their tweet. But
Not
also,
just
we don't have to lie about the fact that this will be recorded as a trans woman crime. This person is going to a male prison. I mean, that's what's happening here.
No,
and
I'm sorry, it's misinformation.
I don't think it's that
not
big
just
a
one
story.
tweet. It's not just one tweet. Anyway, that's it for today. Happy families over here. We shall see you tomorrow. It's Martin Dobney up next.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good afternoon, welcome to your latest GB News weather update with me, Annie, from the Met Office. Rain will continue to push southwards through the rest of the day, and that's because we do have a weather front sinking into northern areas of England and parts of Wales and the Midlands by this afternoon. That's going to be bringing that spell of cloudier and wetter weather. Behind it, though, it will turn much drier and clearer, but that drizzly rain will sink into parts of the southeast to end the day. It does turn clearer and drier behind that rain, but we also see a risk of some mist and fog and low cloud developing by the early hours. Is most likely across central and southern areas of England, but parts of Scotland as well as parts of southern Wales are likely to see some of that mist and fog to develop as well. So it will be a chilly start. Frost will be a little bit more limited than this morning, however, and there will be some sunshine first thing across eastern areas of England as well as eastern areas of Scotland, but quite quickly across the west it will turn wetter and cloudier, but as well as across northern areas. But the most persistent rain will push into parts of Wales and southwest England. For many of us, though, it will start to feel milder as the day moves on, as we get a more southerly wind direction develop. Another band of rain pushes southeastwards through Thursday, bringing some wet weather to more central and southeastern areas. Behind it, though, it will turn more unsettled, so there's a risk of showers for the rest of the week for most areas, but temperatures will also dip down much closer or a little bit below average to end the week.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight.